Yeah, and I hope that people will get something out of it, and like the complexity of this whole thing. Like you and I have been around a while, and
Yep.
this is really complicated. Everybody I think wants to make it simple on both sides. You
Yep.
got these on the left and the right,
Mhm.
and there's so much hysteria. So,
There's a lot here that
uh,
people still don't really know. Like we didn't even get into the Kate Millett stuff. Like
oh yeah,
that's a whole another hour in
right.
itself. Like how that came about. Hey, welcome. Hello. Thank you for clicking. I'm Kevin. Um, I've kind of decided to stop apologizing for my inconsistent posting. It just is what it is. Because this a lot of this subject is like personal kind of history or like recollections or my understanding of the culture that I kind of came through. When it comes to making videos, sometimes things can just seem so obvious that it's kind of redundant and not really worth making a video about at all. So, if there's anyone that wants a video on any subject or wants to have a chat, you can actually reach me through the on the about page. I have an email address that you can reach me on, and also my title on Twitter is the same as it is on YouTube. Thank you to the people who have been messaging and stuff. Messaged me, etc., etc. I appreciate the conversation. Um, this is an introduction to the chat that I have with Max Wolf Valerio. Um, it's kind of been a long time coming. Finishing off his degree until I think he finished in January. So I've kind of been waiting for him to have a clear schedule so that he actually had time to chat, which is probably why it's so long as well. But more about that later. Yeah, we kind of connected over Twitter and were chatting, and we've been chatting about this for well over a year at this point. Max is basically an icon in the trans man space. He transitioned in 1989 in San Francisco. Um, is a poet and also wrote a memoir and has been in like more than a dozen documentaries, and has stayed visible and available, which is kind of unique in this space. A lot of trans men kind of use the privilege that we pass to disappear and go off into the community, general community, and live quiet, stable, successful lives. Pretty much, I came into the lesbian community in 93, 94 in Sydney. I moved back to Sydney and kind of started hanging out in Newtown in lesbian spaces. um and for the first few years it's kind of bright lights, big city, so you get kind of swept up and carried away and have a great old time. um Somewhere around 98 or 99, I kind of there started to be a bit of a shift. Things started to kind of loosen a little, and I started to see kind of advertisements for lipstick lesbians, which were gender conforming women who were homosexual that wanted to connect with other gender conforming homosexual women. There was generally a very professional business type kind of aspect to the notices or to those groups. Clearly, I never participated in that, but I remember starting to see these, women for women or femme for femme kind of dynamic that started to open up after what I assume was a couple of decades of kind of this orthodoxy that was, I think it probably had its roots in radical feminist kind of ideology. There was definitely a uniform of, Blunston work boots or engineering boots, blue jeans, plain Bonds t shirt, short hair. So it was kind of very androgynous and a bit anti patriarchal, no makeup or anything like that. which I kind of always assumed came from the 70s and then kind of steamrolled into the 80s. But by the late 90s, that was kind of done and it was a bit jackety. And there was a new generation of people coming into the community. And it just kind of it started to feel like it kind of opened up a lot. Um, and yeah, women that wanted to be feminine started to be a thing, and you started to see women in dresses not being harassed at events every time. Um, and so, like at the same time, I started to realize that I hadn't seen any more. Because when I first came out, there was a lot of butchers need not apply in the personals, or there was just this general aspect of, no butchers, butchers not allowed, kind of, no masculine women kind of thing. So I kind of remember noticing the lipstick lesbian thing happen first. And then the uniform codes sort of started to loosen. um, Being gay was less of a thing, so I suppose the uniform was less necessary for recognition. Because up until that point, if you were talking to a short-haired woman in a Bonds t-shirt, chances were most of the time you're talking to a lesbian. So for those with bad gaydar, like it was a pretty reliable kind of thing. So there was less need for that because there was less need for secrecy. Um, yeah, so I started noticing the femme stuff, and then I started recognizing that there was the anti butch or the anti masculine female masculinity thing started to loosen up. And then coming into 2000, there was some like just little tidbits of drag king aspects, like kind of, like you'd hear or see pictures of drag kings. And then there was kind of this explosion of masculine stuff that came through. And that was kind of when I started to bump into Max. He was in the Lauren Cameron book of photos of trans men, that like the first cohort in the late 80s, early 90s of trans men that transitioned. He was in that book. I I think he was in. I know he was in several documentaries, and I kind of remember. I think I've seen a few of them, but Australia is kind of like half a decade, or was at pre, like this is, well, it wasn't pre-internet, but it was pre-internet as it currently is now. So we were, like 5 or 10 years still behind. Um, so trying to get your hands on any of these movies or documentaries like the Max movie or You Don't Know Dick, or like a lot of these trans men documentaries that he was in, getting your hands on them was almost impossible. I think I kind of saw one of them or two of them at the Mardi Gras Film Festival, but I'm not sure. But I just started to become aware of Max, and learnt his story. And like he came out in 75 at university and was part of the radical feminist kind of um, political movement. And then from that, he went into the punk scene, and he's a poet as well. And he has this long history, and he's unique because he has stayed around and stayed available. Um, and he's just really warm and well considered and open minded, and just, great all round company. And he has lived through and experienced this changing over the last 30 or 40 years of this culture. And because he was in San Francisco for, a long time. I think he said he left San Fran in 2011 or 2012 to go back to Boulder to go back to college. he kind of was at the cutting edge of a lot of this. So a lot of, a lot of the big movers and shakers in San Francisco trans community are his friends, or he knows them. He's, a poet, so he's been part of the art world, and he's been in several documentaries that I will link a whole heap of this stuff in the description of the video, so you can check it out yourself. I read the memoir at the beginning of my transition. It was really interesting and really helpful. But yeah, so I'm sorry, this is a really long chat. There wasn't really a natural cut in the middle of it, so I kind of figured instead of doing two videos, I would just do one really long video. If you stick with it till the end, your patience will be rewarded, because I've watched it back a few times now in editing, and it's just warm and engaging and interesting as we both talk about, the histories of how we got here from our, unique individual perspectives. But yeah, anyway, I hope you enjoy.
I mean, there were always people who were saying weird things, right? But I just felt like overall it was more positive, from the mainstream media and, in every way. Whereas now, I mean, I think we still mainly get good press from the so-called mainstream media. There's still a lot of positive stuff out there. Yeah. But I definitely feel, there's definitely a backlash going on. It's pretty bad. This is as bad as I've seen it in my lifetime. I've never seen it this bad.
Yeah.
So I'm definitely worried. And I don't catastrophize. I tend to be an optimist, but what we're in right now feels different. It feels kind of a little scary, like a little grave. I know you tend to be more optimistic about it. The best thing that happened recently was that Jon Stewart little interview that he did, which I only saw I didn't see the whole thing yet. I saw the first part, and I just thought it was great. And there's a really a mainstream person coming out who people take seriously, and for whatever reason. But it takes a comedian, I guess, to break through some of the bullshit. But I follow a lot of libertarians and conservatives and left-wing people all across the political spectrum, say on my Facebook page, and I've never seen so much so many negative things about trans people. Conservatives used to be, at least in the States, they used to be more like live and let live. Like whatever, you're following your dream, you've got to be yourself, because they're big on individual rights and being yourself. And what I'm seeing now is not that. It's a lot of there's a lot of fear and a lot of disparagement and a lot of mean-spirited comments and memes and everything else. So, and a lot of mockery, mainly of trans women, of course.
Yeah, they always cop it the worst.
Yeah, and a lot of that is driven, ironically, by the left, by, as you know, the TERF left, radical feminists.
It's interesting watching so many people characterize TERFs as right wing. That I find that, and in the meantime, they had a blow up in their ranks recently, because the hardcore leftists are angry at the more conservative parent type groups for forming temporary coalitions with right wing Candace Owen type people.
Right.
So they had like a big blow up, I think it was 2 weeks ago now, where there was like division in the ranks, because some people were like, listen, this is a child safeguarding issue. We have a lot of questions that we would like answers to, and we don't care how this comes about. And some of the rad firms are like, no, these people are anti-abortion and you need to hold the political line.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting because I know Kathy Brennan, of all people.
Yeah.
She's against she's against Wolf. She's against a lot of the new GC people, and the turfs, the turfs now. Of course, they don't like to be called turfs, but whatever.
Yeah.
And she basically says they're mentally ill, and things like this, and she's really opposed to them teaming up, like you said, with the right. You know, and I think she's right to be afraid there. It's like a lot of that. I think she's afraid of it spilling over into gay rights, and into gender nonconforming gay people. And that's quite possible,
Well, yeah, because like we just are a block, like the whole LGB without the T stuff. We can't like there's do you I always thought like because you were around when the I and the T and the Q and everything got added.
hmm
I like people keep it's very strange because I hear people talking about the I doesn't belong in the LGB, the T doesn't belong in the LGB because they're completely separate things. Um, I always kind of thought when they added the T, it was for like HST, like people who already were in the gay community, like in the LGB community, and people with DSDs that were in the gay community, like kind of adding, like progressive kind of thing where you kind of recognize that they are part of the movement as well. Like it wasn't a capital, like a capital I or a capital T, whereas like every single trans or person with an intersex condition is added, but it was kind of for symbolic the people that fitted those criteria that were already within the group. And that kind of
Yeah, no,
I
no,
always
it
kind of
was,
took it that way, but it seems
yeah.
that I'm alone in that.
Yeah, at least in San Francisco, where I think it was introduced the first time, probably,
Yeah.
like it was in the 90s. And I remember being in meetings at the FTMI group, the FTMI support group, and we were talking about it, and it just seems like it. And there were other people there. I think Susan Stryker was there, so there were people there who were, trans women, and also, people who were, we didn't call them allies, but people's wives and girlfriends or partners,
Soffers.
and
We can,
sofas, right?
yeah.
Sofas, yeah,
Yeah.
sofas, yeah. I don't even think that term was around. I mean, this is like we're going back now, way back,
Yeah.
and it was just the LGB. It was just the LG, and they had just added the B, kind of reluctantly, because people used to throw. Well, I was one of them, I admit. We used to throw things at the bisexuals back in the 70s when they were in the Pride Parade, and they'd go by. They were like a little motley crew, like 10 people holding up their little bisexual sign. Very brave people
Yeah.
now I see,
Yeah.
and he would just throw things at them, and boo! Everybody was booing. And of course, half the people were booing. Some of them are bisexual now. Uh, and then others are like me,
Yeah.
uh, kind of a weird straight, queer straight person, God knows. But
Yeah.
but in any case, the T that it was, I believe they were going to some kind of LGB event. They were going to present this to whatever committee it is. Maybe it's the Pride Committee, some local committee in San Francisco where they wanted to add the T. And maybe the first time they were going to do it was for Pride. And I believe it was sometime in the mid 90s, maybe it was 94 to 96, something like that. That's my memory. Someone should really, I mean, I could, but somebody should really do research and nail that down. But I remember distinctly that my feeling was I wasn't sure about it. I was a little skeptical because I felt like LGB was really different. It was sexual orientation, and we were gender identity, and I wasn't sure. Like I felt like, okay, the reason it was being done, and it was supposed to be all inclusive. It wasn't just the T people who were there. It was everybody. It was trans people in general. Yeah, and I kind of felt like, it's really different. Somebody like me, I mean, it's changed over the years to some degree, but you always feel, I date women, so I mean, I always felt like I'd go to the gay pride, and I felt like an outsider for years and years and years, like, well, what am I doing here? And now I feel a little more welcome, and, but definitely as time has gone on, but it's still different than it used to be, you
Yeah.
know? So, but yeah, so I felt like, well, it's really different. A lot of us are pretty straight, but we're trans. And I also felt like, what we're trying to do, how does it align with the lesbian and gay rights movement? You know, when we disclose, it's not really, we could call it coming out, but when we disclose, we are afraid we're going to lose something. And I'm talking about transsexuals here, not
Yeah.
gender nonconforming people.
Mm.
When I tell somebody I'm transsexual, I was born female, I'm afraid that that's it. They're going to see me as female from then on, right? Or they're going to try and put me back in that category. So I'm going to lose myself. Whereas when people come out as gay, they're gaining. They're being seen as their true selves. They don't have to hide anymore, right? So it's so different. To say that we should come out or we're coming out doesn't really mean the same thing, and so much of our struggle, I think, as transsexuals at least, is around, sure, it's around social acceptance to some degree, but it's about healthcare. It's about access, especially in the 90s, access to healthcare, possibly access to insurance. In the United States, there was no access to any, or very little, and I think no access to insurance. The
Yeah.
government certainly didn't pay for it, and private insurance didn't for your
Amazon
surgery.
Amazon Eve was talking about is it Sheila Jeffries wrote the Transsexual Empire, didn't she?
Uh, Janice Raymond.
Oh, Janice Raymond.
Yeah.
Then
Mm-hmm.
went on to work. Amazon Eve was saying that she then went on to work with the Reagan administration, and I'm
Yeah.
assuming this
Yeah.
is about the AIDS, like
Yeah. The
at the
80s.
beginning of
Yeah.
AIDS.
Yeah.
They actually worked to cut off all healthcare access for
Yeah.
transsexuals, and they were successful, and it lasted for about a decade. Um,
Yeah.
but
More
then,
than that, So that was in the 80s. That was before my time. I mean, I was around, but I wasn't trans then. I hadn't yet, done transition. But so apparently there was a time, interestingly enough, where in the United States, transsexuals could access health care through Medicaid, maybe even Medicare,
mm,
which is the government programs for people
yeah,
who don't know. And I don't know about private insurance. It was still probably considered experimental. They probably weren't paying for it, but you could do it through the government if you were poor enough, which is a whole other, you have to reach a certain threshold. I mean, you have to be poor, right? Or with Medicare, 65 and older. But that was taken away. Yes, Janice Raymond lobbied, worked with basically worked with the Reagan administration, or probably introduced the idea to the Reagan administration, right?
yeah,
I mean, and I mean, because most people aren't thinking about us until recently.
mm,
I think that's the big difference, is that now, you know, we're people are thinking about us, which maybe a lot of times I think, God, I wish they weren't. Uh,
yeah,
but but in any case, there was that debate about the T. The whole thing was strength in numbers, LGBT, and a lot of us, I think, to kind of speak to what you were thinking,
mm,
um, a lot of us did come out at that point. In the '90s, we did come out of the if they were trans men, we were coming out of the lesbian community, and so I don't know so much about trans women coming out of the gay world. I didn't encounter that, frankly, very much.
yeah,
But so I think there was that sort of, a lot of the guys, a lot of the trans guys, then kind of wanted to kind of stay in their home. They wanted to be able to go to Pride and feel like they were part of it and so on. So there was that impulse and that sort of that need. So that fed into it, but I was a little skeptical. I didn't say we shouldn't, but I was, I think I may have made some argument against it. I can't remember, but I remember thinking, I don't know, I don't know
mm,
about this. I probably said something skeptical about it, but most people were on that train. I wasn't sure, and
yeah,
here we are.
yeah. I kind of was like, because I wasn't. This was 5 or 6 years before I transitioned, so I was like, oh, well, wasn't that kind of wasn't that kind of included already? Like there were already trans people kicking around, so like it kind of just seemed a little obvious. So I wasn't that fussed. And then like when I transitioned, it was basically like you are no longer what like if you're going to transition, that's cool, but you are no longer a lesbian. Do not show up to events. Like
Right.
it's not okay. You are
Right.
like don't call yourself a lesbian. So the option of like in terms of my friends, like it was the same as always. Like there were a few minor hiccups as people kind of got used to the idea because it was still at the point where nobody that they probably were hearing about this for the first time as I'm telling them that I'm going to do it. So there was a bit of a shock that way. So that didn't change very much, but the political terms, as far as the lesbian community writ large was concerned, it was like, that's it. No, you're no longer part of the community.
Yeah.
Um, and there are a lot of guys that were really like, it was like it's a loss, like it's a big
Yeah.
loss. You're losing your home.
Yeah.
So I kind of was like, I was kind of more upset about that. I felt the loss more for my partner because we were,
Hmm.
like a lesbian couple. Um,
Hmm.
and she was kind of politically lesbian in one way. Like she used to describe herself as a political lesbian, and she was bisexual, but she kind of then kind of moved over into women. Yeah, trans seemed to suit her, and she's now married to a trans guy that she has a couple of kids with in a different country. Blah 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 blah. But I kind of felt
Right.
I felt that loss more for her because it was like she worked so hard for that identity because it's the early 90s, so it's still kind of a big deal to come out, and her dad was
Right.
about it. And like for the first 5 years of our relationship, or for the first three years of our relationship, he was did not want to meet me, kept trying to introduce her to boys and blah 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 blah. um I kind of felt it on that front. I wasn't It was a bit of a bummer, but I was like, yeah, you kind of have a point. Like if I'm going to transition, then it deeply sucks, and I'm glad that I still have all of my lesbian friendship community, but I probably shouldn't be going to women only events. Like that's kind of,
Right.
it sucks to be me, but that's kind of fair enough. You write about this in the book a little bit as well, and I've been
Mhm.
thinking about this a lot late. Like the whole, like you come out of the lesbian community, and there's because you don't have to deal with any men. The feminism, like the feminist rhetoric, can be like a lot more full on. So I kind of like, and even in the group of people that I was transitioning with, the perception that we mostly had of men, who men
Mhm.
were, what it was to be a man in society was so negative.
Oh yeah.
And there was a lot of, like we kind of knew that we would physically end up looking like men. So there was like
We
this,
were hoping.
I was kind of like almost like a decade after you. Oh, well, I was
Uh-huh.
literally 11 years after you. So I knew it
Uh-huh.
would work. And I didn't
Hmm.
know I would look exactly like this, but I knew I would look like this. I knew I would pass.
Right.
Um,
Right.
but
Right.
then what does it mean to be seen as a guy? What does it mean to live as a guy? Like, and, like going to like a friend's, the first time I bumped into it, I went to a friend's party.
Uh-huh.
And basically it was a mixed crowd, but it was like 80% lesbians, and this woman was
Hmm.
we'd just gotten a puppy, um
Hmm.
my first adult puppy. And this woman was
Yeah.
like, oh, you've got a dog, like what kind of dog is it? And I was like, oh, she's a Rottie Shepherd cross. um,
Okay.
and this this lesbian was like, oh, typical. And I was just like,
Oh, that's so funny.
I remember looking at
Right.
Alison and going, well, what the fuck is going on here? Like,
Right.
yeah, I remember being deeply shocked, and I was so
Yeah.
aghast. I was like, I don't even know what to say to this. Like,
Yeah.
there is no comeback. Like, I'm
No.
scum under your shoe for the first
Oh
time
yeah.
ever. Like, what the hell
Hmm.
is happening? And Allison looked at me
Hmm.
like, holy shit, it's happening.
Yeah,
Um,
you're a man now.
Yeah,
Right.
and I wasn't even fully cussing at that stage. It was like, I was
Uh-huh.
only just like I was still in that really in between stage where
Uh-huh.
you're quite incongruous, you're still kind of
Hmm.
oily, and you've taken on
Yeah.
the water weight kind
A
of thing.
little,
And I was like,
a little bloated. Yeah.
yeah, like I was like, what is happening?
A
Uh,
little 14-year-old. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, it was,
I think that was kind of damaging for us. I think that, and again, that's kind of unique to the group that came out of that lesbian milieu, which started somewhere around the time I transitioned, as far as I know. Because when I went to my first FTM meeting in 1988, in September in 1988, um, I was asking the guys, and I'd say at least half of them were totally passing, and then there were people who weren't, who were just starting or whatever. But I asked them, at that time I was a lesbian, I thought I was. And so I said, how many of you were lesbians? Because I was trying to figure out, what am I going to do? Right? How am I going to tell my friends, what I, how am I going to do this thing? And, can you get out? Can you get out of this thing? How do you get out of this lesbian thing? Right. And it's very sticky, as you're saying, really. So, I was asking them and they were saying, I said, were you a lesbian? And they were like, no, no way, no way, no. They were all insulted, and I was shocked. I was like, "Oh my God!" Well, then, what were they? You know, so, and I think I wrote about that in the memoir, which because it's a big deal, the whole thing of leaving the lesbian world, or how are you going to relate to the lesbian world? Um, it's interesting because it's quite possible that the newer group of trans men won't go through that. And that will not, they'll be like the older group, whatever these guys were doing. What I heard later was that those guys might have been lying, the ones that I asked, were you a lesbian? And they said, no way. Because apparently, if you told a shrink that you were a lesbian, you had a harder time getting the testosterone. So that was something a lot of people didn't necessarily say. But I have a feeling that probably, probably a lot of them were. Of course, there were other kinds of people. Other kinds of people there. There was a friend of mine who had been a housewife, a married straight woman, ostensibly, who was on a beeline to become a gay man, so there were people like that. Lou Sullivan, the famous Lou Sullivan, was never a lesbian.
yeah,
And, I think he had a real positive idea about men. Lou really loved men. He, he, he didn't have very good feelings about feminists, right? Or about lesbians generally. I mean, he wasn't like, I don't think he would, have, yeah, he didn't. He didn't. That's the truth. He was definitely very pro man. He didn't have any qualms about coming out and saying, those women are just wrong, and they're hostile to men and they're, these crazy feminists. Because he had already had to deal with that in the 80s. He had a taste of it. Um,
well, it was a very political and in your face time in a way that doesn't really like it kind of almost translates a little bit now, but not it's not quite the same. Like it kind of was this, yeah. It just
well,
isn't
it
quite the
was, yeah, yeah, it was just so it was really different. I think we really ended up transforming the T and the LGBT did end up transforming the landscape politically, along with other things. It's not the only thing,
same.
but just the whole woke left. I mean, back then you didn't have the woke left, or it was different. I think everybody pretty much leaned to the left, of course. If they didn't talk about it, but it was definitely. I think this is California. That was in California. I'm pretty sure everybody was voting Democrat. A lot of them were hard. A lot of us had been really like practically communists or socialists or, definitely leaning to the left. Um, so that was taken for granted, but you didn't have all this parsing of language,
Mm.
like don't say I want to go on a diet. I want to lose weight. If you say I want to lose weight in certain circles now, you get pilloried as being fat phobic
Yeah.
or that didn't happen back then. I
No.
don't remember that, or don't say crazy. You're not supposed to say crazy now, apparently, because that's putting people down who are mentally ill.
It
Don't
really
say
has just
lame.
gone to the extreme, like it's just so like it's really remarkable. Like because I kind of came in at the tail end of when transgender just like it had won the argument and transgender
Yeah,
had become the title of use, but it was still very frowned upon, and you didn't really want to say you were transgendered in FTM. Like at FTMA, you'd get shouted down, but they would let you. You weren't meant to go to the meetings if you were TG instead of
interesting.
TS, but they wouldn't kick you out. They would just kind of
Oh,
tolerate you, kind of feel.
oh, interesting. That's
Um,
interesting.
but yeah, like the extremes that like just this whole progressive, like fat phobic, crazy, like you can't we're losing words. Like it's getting so
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah. As a writer, I hate that. I mean,
yeah,
that's kind of what led me to kind of re-examine my politics. Is I just hate that. I hate like saying, well, you can't say this, you can't say that is kind of insane. Because as a writer, I want to be able to use any word I want. I mean, carefully, but it strikes me it's censorship, it's mental censorship, it's a narrowing. It's a narrowing. I like things that make things wider, you know, with the with discrimination, with thoughtfulness, but nonetheless, that's where my vision goes. Let's make this lens wider, which of course is what happened with the transgender thing. Now, I'm going to contradict myself because I think I saw that happen. I saw the transsexual go to transgender and the umbrella be created. We both saw that. We saw the umbrella being created, the transgender umbrella.
yeah,
And I think it was Kate Bornstein and Leslie Feinberg who
yeah.
came up with that. And I sensed at some point that it was getting too wide. It was getting so wide that it was becoming meaningless, a little bit too inclusive and diverse, maybe. Uh,
It kind of is a bit like the non-binary thing. I kind of understand it and I kind of don't. But it's like all of these things have kind of always existed, but naming them and specifically giving them all definitions and lining them all up in the way that we seem to be doing, kind of doing the opposite of what it's meant to uplift, but in actual fact, it's just compressing. You know, it's very strange. Like with I used to go to the F to M Australia support group
mm-hmm,
peer
mm-hmm,
meetings by
mm-hmm,
from trans men for trans men. Um,
mm-hmm,
and the guy that had taken that over was a transsexual gay man that had been, like in a heterosexual marriage before he
mm-hmm,
transitioned. Um, and he was really anti-trans, like he hated the umbrella, like couldn't stand it, despised everything about it, hated the word transgender. Like, and I was like a little punk ass, like, what's your problem? I don't see what your issue is here. Like, I
mm-hmm,
kind of
mm-hmm,
rejected the born in the wrong body
mm-hmm.
medicalized thing that he was really pushing. But at the
Okay.
same time, even though he despised all of these things,
Mm-hmm.
he didn't try to police what anyone actually said in the meetings. Like
Yeah.
he didn't
Yeah.
stop people from showing up. Like
Right.
he would speak his mind and say, "No, I disagree with you for this, and this reason." And
Right.
I think that's a bad idea, and I don't like it. But
Right.
that was as far as it went. There was never
Yeah.
shouting or never any, like excommunication or
Right.
there was difference that was like you could be at polar opposites of disagree
Mm-hmm.
about absolutely everything to do with this and
Mm-hmm.
still be best mates.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
you got
Well,
along.
now we have social media. I think that's a big difference too, and we get to hear everybody's opinion and people are, and sometimes they're anonymous and they mob. I mean, I saw that tendency, the parsing of language, the, that sort of censorious attitude of, you know, uh, putting people down, wanting them to leave the group, whatever group you were in. I saw that start in that F to M group on LiveJournal, which I think you were in that, right?
No.
Oh, and it was just a LiveJournal group on social media, and that's where I first encountered this crazy stuff about don't say, you know, um, there was somebody who wrote into the group. And of course, it's with on LiveJournal, we made up names, and nobody knew necessarily who anyone was. You didn't have to use your real picture. I mean, at some point, you start figuring it out.
Mm.
But, someone wrote into the group and said, it's been so hard for me. I'm sitting here, I've been trying to write into this group for so long and I've been so scared. I'm afraid of saying the wrong thing. And I'm just trying to grapple with this, my gender identity and with these issues I have, and I'm finally writing in. I hope I don't say anything retarded. And yeah, and of course, this poor innocent person, they sounded, I figured, God, this guy's in butt fuck, you know, Kansas or something with a gun to his head for all we know, and hasn't transitioned and is just really like it took everything in this person to write in. And what happens? People jumped all over him. The moderator came in, and if you use that term one more time, it's a slur. You are out of here. And other people started jumping in and saying the same thing. And I'm like, oh my God, this person, we don't know if they're on the verge of suicide. And where's our compassion? Where's our empathy? Who cares? They weren't using retarded as a slur.
Yeah.
And we knew that, but it's like a power trip, I think. So, I ended up getting in a long, drawn out argument about that. And then we weren't talking about the person and what they needed. So, I mean, I just was so turned off by that whole thing. It wasn't humane. It wasn't empathetic. It was kind of, without overstating it, it kind of verged on this totalitarianism. There's still little, you can feel that, the seed of that. And it's only gotten worse. That was back in 2005 on LiveJournal. And now it's like I thought it would just be a bunch of weird little people in this corner of the world. And, in San Francisco, I was seeing that, but now it's all over. People are losing their jobs, over this. They like something on Twitter that they're not supposed to like, according to somebody somewhere. I'm not sure who these people are, but that's the end of them. So it's very disturbing.
I saw a really interesting video from a young trans masculine gender fuck playing, has started transition, is looks from the looks of them hasn't been quite on T for more than a year and a half. So has the facial hair under the chin, but not really on the face yet. Right. Was wearing makeup and long dangly earrings and doing the gender fuck thing. And was critiquing Leslie Feinberg's Stone Butch Blues as not good enough, and just like going to town and claiming that the Well of Loneliness was a trans novel. And not really understanding the history of, like, there is a smorgasbord of this stuff that is around now, and it seems plentiful. And like, that was not always the case. Like that book came up, like Stone Butch Blues came up, and I think it was like another couple of years before I stumbled upon anything else. Like it was Pat Khalifia's book. That Marco
sex changes, right?
Yeah, Sex Changes.
Patrick Khalifa, yeah.
There was Stone Butch Blues. There was Lauren Cameron's book. There was a Drag King book by
Della Grace Volcano, yeah.
And then there was the sex change. What was the guy in the 70s that was the nurse?
Mario Martino.
No one ever found that. So, because in Australia, it's much harder to come by.
Oh, he was Australian.
No, he was American, but finding that book in Australia was just wasn't going to happen, right? Even finding the 4 or 5 books that I did find, was like they were years apart. It was like a parched desert. This stuff
nothing was out there. Nothing. Hardly at all. Droplets, right?
Yeah.
And Stone Butch Blues, I think, came out in 93. Or 92 or 93. And I mean, I read it and I really, I thought it was like a really bad romance novel, right? And I was actually in contact with Leslie Feinberg because we were preparing to do the next. She was preparing to do. I'll call her she. I don't know.
Yeah.
Was preparing to do the next book, which was Transgender Warriors,
Mm.
and Feinberg wanted my photograph because I know that they didn't have they then. Sometimes she was he. She said she would be he in front of was it I'm she in front of a lesbian audience and I'm he in front of a trans audience. So, and her partner, Minnie Bruce Pratt, ended up at her on her when she passed away, calling her she and a lesbian. I think whatever. Anyway, that sort of feels more like Leslie to me. I took Stone Butch Blues to be kind of a tearjerker
Mm.
and a kind of an estrogen soaked tearjerker, kind of a romance novel. Um,
Pretty propagandistic.
Yeah, yeah, and I felt like it was really an anti-transsexual book, interestingly enough, because the protagonist, Jess, well, she goes through all these different hardships, which is very, heart-tugging, but it's at some point it was just too much. It was like she got, cancer, and then she got a motorcycle accident, and then the police were every chapter was something else. She got beat up by the police. I think she got raped by the football team.
Yeah, that was the
Yeah,
first chapter.
I,
Then
well, I
she
mean,
goes on to get raped by the police multiple times. Like, yeah,
oh God, it was like too much.
yeah.
So, I mean, it sounds terrible laughing about this, but I felt like it was just like too much at some point. It was like, you got to be kidding me. Now what's happening? And of course, I was set up to feel that way about the book because the way she wrote it, she said that she was living the little baby Jess. Her parents reject her because they just know there's something different about her, even when she's an infant. There's something weird. And there just happens to be some Navajos, some Dene, some Navajos living in New Jersey across the hall, and they're kind of traditional. They go in and they notice that little Jess is some kind of a shaman or very special because they recognize the baby as being some kind of trans or two spirit. I don't know if she uses that term. Gotta laugh. I mean, I'm half native, so I gotta laugh. But anyway, I was like, yeah, right. And so they give her a special ring, a magic ring, right? I just thought, you got to be kidding me. It was just like so very maudlin, but people love the book. I mean, it's in on one level, it does sort of move your heartstrings. I think the beginning more, but
It was kind of one of those things where it was like, this was the first time I ever bumped in, like, because I lived that life. Like,
Mhm.
like people kind of talk about gender non-conforming now, like they're talking about people like Julie Bindel or Kathleen Stock, where they're kind of
Oh yeah,
definitely women, but they're a little bit, like they're androgynous and they're a little bit masculine, and that you can kind of tell when you look at them that they kind of have masculinized personalities, but they're not extreme. They kind of, within the
yeah.
realms of, they're within the bell curve.
Oh yeah.
People talk about that now, but like people kind of don't think about no like gender non like extreme gender non-conforming when trans people are talking about it. They kind of mean Leslie Feinberg, like who
Yeah, who
looked
transitioned?
like a
She tried. She actually transitioned in the
she.
60s, I think.
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah, and she had a beard and everything. And so she had electrolysis. So what's interesting about Feinberg, and Lou Sullivan wrote an article about her and that appeared in his newsletter before I got into the group. But I do remember this. I remember going to Pride, maybe it was 87 or 88, and at the Workers' World table, because for the the viewers who don't know that much about Leslie Feinberg, she was a communist, like a dedicated, not I'm not just saying that as you're a commie. She was for real a communist. She was in the Workers' World Party. She was the editor of their newsletter or magazine, and I saw a book by her, and it was about her journey, uh this medicalized journey, and she went by her real name there, which was Diane Leslie Feinberg, or her full name. And it was an anti-transition book. It was an anti-medical transition book, and this was in the 80s.
oh wow.
So, and it took that turf view before we even thought of it as turf. It took that view of there's this medical industrial complex that's turning, that turned me into a man, that was trying to turn me into a man because of the patriarchy and capitalism. And I managed to escape. And now I'm a strong lesbian, fighting the patriarchy and fighting capitalism. So that was the view of that. It was a pamphlet more than a book. And Lou Sullivan wrote about this, and he was very angry, of course, and he was very critical of it. And I remember reading his review probably in '88 and making the connection to the book, or to that pamphlet that I saw at the Workers' World Table. And then all of a sudden, in 1991 or 92, probably 92, I started seeing all these posters around town in San Francisco for Stone Butch Blues by Leslie Feinberg. And she looked very butch, like for real, not like Julie Bindel, right? or Kathleen Stock, who,
Yeah.
yeah,
Like actually like hardcore gender non-conforming.
yeah,
Like
yeah, because she had been on testosterone,
I kind of
yeah.
heard rumors about that. Like it was like, does she have an intersex condition? Was she on testosterone? Like there were all of these rumors, but no one really knew what the full story was.
Because she was kind of secretive. There were, I think at some point she didn't bring it up, but I mean, I knew people, there was a photograph of her maybe in the Transgender Warriors book. I would have to grab my book and see, but where she's got her beard and she looks really different. But it was a while ago. It was very interesting, actually. But so I really read Stone Butch Blues as an anti-medical transition book because the character is really put upon because she's so she's so butch and everybody hates her guts. And then at the end, and so she transitions to become a man, kind of to escape the all the harassment, which of course is what the feminist turf left says. That's why we do this, right? So it goes right into that, and then at some point she sees the light and she goes back to being a lesbian. She gets off the testosterone. Oh, and she does have top surgery. She goes off the testosterone. She goes back and she's greeted by all her lesbian friends who are crying when they greet her. And at the end, she releases doves into the air, at the very end.
Yeah.
So now the one thing in that account was that she was around, I think she's around drag queens at the end. So she's around gender nonconforming people. And there's a thread in that book, which is pro gender nonconforming, which kind of has an opening. There's a bit of an opening in there. I think that for what came later, which was an alignment of gender nonconforming with transsexuals. Well, we all became part of this umbrella. I think it was because she needed us for her Workers' World Party. That's a very cynical way of viewing it. But, I think she wanted to sort of appropriate our oppression as, as an oppressed people, and kind of appropriate for her vision of class struggle. Instead of class struggle, it became the struggle of these poor gender nonconforming people against the patriarchy. And of course, she identified Indigenous people as being the holders of this sacred flame of gender nonconformity.
Of understanding and wisdom, and
yeah. And I remember I had a conversation with Leslie right after I read Stone Butch Blues, and this would have been, I believe, 94, and she was working on the Transgender Warriors book. I was very friendly with her. I was very supportive. I was very left at the time. I think I'd come out of my communist phase, which was the 80s, but I was kind of an anarchist, but I was definitely very far left. But we talked on the phone, and I really wanted her to see to in this book Transgender Warriors that she was writing. I really wanted her to be supportive of transsexuals, of people who were medically transitioning. And I was a little unsure if she was going to do that, because I kind of had a feeling she wasn't coming from that place. But she assured me that she would write us into the book in a way, or that she saw it in a more positive way. So we didn't have the term TERF at the time, even though Janice Raymond's book had come out.
Oh
of
yeah.
course, in 1979, you know. So, and she was probably influenced by that. You know, that's probably part of where she was coming from. But in any case, the Transgender Warriors book was definitely supportive of medical transition, but it did have that idea of the gender umbrella, which, you know, I'm not going to say I'm totally against that. I mean, gender nonconforming people, we do have something in common with them, you know, obviously. So I wouldn't say that it was totally a negative thing at all, but I do think, you know, I'm a little cynical about it, you know, about her reason for doing it. And I think that the effect it's had over time, over a long the last 3 decades,
Yeah.
the effect it's had is sort of a lot of people are confused, you know. There's a lot of confusion now, like when, you know, non-binary, most people don't necessarily know the difference between non-binary and trans. They're still trying to figure out, you know, the trans men are the people who were born female
Yeah.
and the trans women are the people who are
Still
born
back
male.
at like back to basics, and there's all this, you know, super advanced stuff that, you know, is it's
Yeah, you know, they're still like with Newtonian physics, and a lot of us are doing quantum physics.
yeah.
And I think there's, you know, people are still pretty much confused on that level. And, you know, and it's all been so politicized, which I think Feinberg was part of that
Oh yeah.
politicization, you know,
Yeah, yeah.
and to the left,
Hmm.
because transsexuality is a weird thing, in that I think that turf feminists saw it as right wing. You know, they saw it as this you know, that we're trying to reify traditional gender roles. We're these fools, or that we're these, you know, we're right wing in the sense that we're doing this thing where we're not being ambiguous. You know, people who transition are reifying traditional gender roles, and so therefore we're right wingers. You know, culturally.
Yeah.
So, you know, you can see it either way, you know, and then the actual right wing, if they're socially conservative, they'll say, well, God, you know, these people are screwing it all up. Men becoming women, women becoming men. Oh my God, you know. So, you know, you can see it. We get it from both sides.
Yeah.
Transsexuals are unique in that we get it from everybody. You know, everybody can object to us if they want, you know,
Yeah.
they can find some reason. But what is interesting, I'll say this first on this show. I'll say this first on this show. Um, what is interesting to me, I haven't figured out the meaning yet. May need to write about this if there is a meaning, if it's not purely a coincidence. But a lot of this really anti-trans uh, blowback uh, began after Leslie Feinberg passed away. You know, she passed away December 2014, and really somewhere a little not long after that, things got started getting bad, and we saw the reemergence of turf feminism as a force to be reckoned with.
Hmm.
Whereas she sort of nullified that. I was never crazy about Feinberg, but she kind of, I think there was something about her presence that nullified that. That
Hmm.
nullified. I mean, it was definitely there, but it seemed as though it didn't have the power. And maybe it has nothing to do with her. Maybe it's purely a coincidence. She was a very charismatic person. Did you ever meet her or see
No,
her?
no. I saw her on Donahue. Like I read the book, and the book for me
Mhm.
was really, it was really about the concept of, you know, because I'd lived with this thing for my entire life. And, you know, like I had people telling me, you know, like neighbors and, you know, family members. And,
Mhm.
you know, like it was obvious that I was in a very different social position. Like people saying you should have been born a boy because I had all of these, you know, like my mother thought that I maybe had an intersex condition. Like I was just this weird, you know, odd mix of things.
Mhm.
I kind of, she also was very good at, you're still human, you
Well,
know,
that's
just be a good
good.
person.
Right.
You know, like I wasn't ever
Uh,
rejected in any way, shape, or form. So
yeah, that's
it's a
great.
huge
That's
thing.
good.
And Alison gave me this book, and it was like a light bulb went off. And I kind of
Mhm.
tried to say to her, I'm like the person in the book, but she didn't
Mhm.
want to hear it. She didn't really understand what I was trying to say because I didn't, like, I was freaked out. So I didn't, you know, I thought she was about to reject me. And, blah 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 blah. So I didn't say
And who's Alice? Who's
Alison
Alice?
was the partner I was with for like
Okay, Allison. Okay.
um yeah, anyway, so and then it kind of, that kind of gave me that. And there are a lot of things in the book about what does this make me? Does this make me a man? Does this make me like, am I still a woman? There's this ambiguity that she talks about throughout the book
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm-hmm.
rather than I found that like just the possibility of, you know, thinking about the options, I found that to be very freeing. I didn't
Mm-hmm.
find that oppressive at all. It was like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, there are other people that have this as well. Like there are other people that
Right.
white. Like I know I'm female, but I'm really not socially a woman. Like
Right.
like like I
Right.
was a bridesmaid at my best friend's wedding, and people that didn't know me were like basically there was one guy that like it was like I was a man wearing a dress at a Christian wedding. Like they didn't say anything because there was a social politeness, but it was
Right.
definitely not okay that I was the bridesmaid at this wedding, which was
Right.
kind of embarrassing. But there were enough people that knew me there that were like, "Oh, you're a good sport," kind of, like
Right.
we'll
Right.
forget all about
Right.
this. Don't worry about it.
Right. We'll burn the pictures.
Pretty
Right.
much like like because it's one of those social situations where it's like, please don't ask me to do this, and then you get, I'm a best friend, so there's no
Right.
saying no, so you kind of have to do it. But it was just a car
Right.
crash. um
Right. Oh yeah. That happens to a lot of us.
yeah.
I,
um
I I had to wear a dress to my sister's wedding. Of course, pre-transition.
yeah,
It
yeah,
was totally weird. It was so weird.
yeah. And people respond like there's just they don't know what's wrong, but they just
Uh-huh.
have this visceral like, oh no, 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 no,
Yeah. Yeah.
I can't look at you, like,
Yeah.
no.
Yeah.
um
One of my exes saw a picture and she said, "You look like what was that? Serial mom from the I wasn't a blonde, but serial mom from the John Waters film." Like I was.
just bad. Yeah, so like that book kind of, for me, like I wasn't really involved in like I didn't even know the transition. I had met a trans guy years before, a couple of years, maybe 4 or 5 years before I read the book, but I
Hmm.
didn't quite put it together. Like it was just
Yeah.
this weird
Oh yeah.
kind of floaty thing, and I read the book and I was like yes, it was like a kind of flawed book, but it had this idea that just
Yeah.
really helped me along.
It's interesting. Yeah, a lot of, I had started transition again, in 89 and as far as testosterone went, I was exploring before then, but so the book comes out and I'm already transitioned, really, I'm into it. I'm in my transition.
Yeah,
And so I, of course, saw it really differently, but it's interesting because it was so meaningful. I think that book, Stone Butch Blues, was so meaningful for so many trans men,
yeah.
you know. And I never, to be honest, I was never sure why, but you've
Because
explained it very
yeah,
well. You've explained
probably
it very
because
well.
it's
That
the first time they ever really like, and it was a
yeah,
book, so it's like, does testosterone, like she kind of makes it very clear in the book that she totally passes, and she lives
yeah,
completely stealth for a number of years and no one ever knows,
yeah,
and she actually like has sexual relations with people that don't know, like
yeah,
that doesn't know, which kind of, I had a real problem with that. But um
yeah, yeah. I think I
I kind of
remember that
understood
part.
because she
Yeah.
was so lonely after years and years and years, but I was like, that's
Yeah.
meh. Like,
Well,
yeah, it's
that
more the concept of, is this a thing? Like, is this a
right,
possibility? Like,
right. Like there, because if you came out of the lesbian world, then I think it's probably true. I'm sure it was true in Australia from what you said. It was like, people didn't see gender in that way. It was more like if you were a kind of a, you didn't, there was Butch. Butch was happening around that time, like around 88 or 89. People started saying they were Butch, but before then they weren't. There was no Butch Femme even. Everybody was a strong woman. It was turf heaven.
yeah,
I mean, it was like we were all women identified women, and we didn't even we had the Y, or I mean, it was kind of a little hokey, but yeah,
it was heavily policed as well, wasn't it? There was like, I kind of get the sense because
yeah.
I was a kid at that stage, so I
Hmm.
kind of came of age in the early 90s. But
Hmm.
from the stories that, like, because he still kind of came out like as a lesbian, and there was definitely a uniform. It was like Levi jeans, Bonds t-shirt,
Yeah.
plain tight fitting Bonds t-shirts, short hair,
Uh-huh. Hmm.
and it was enforced quite heavily. Like if you showed up to, we didn't have, there weren't any like full time lesbian venues. Like there weren't, like there were enough people around that would have supported like, you know, like a pub or a club or something, and one eventuated, but it like people just didn't support it. Like, yeah,
Yeah, no, there was in San Francisco, there were definitely, oh my God, when I came to San Francisco in 77, there were so many lesbian clubs. There were these huge lesbian clubs, like these huge dance floors, right? And I think there were five or seven. There's none, I think there's none now, if I'm right. But there were tons of lesbian bars, and there were like 500 gay bars at one point. I mean, this is San Francisco in the 70s, right? So things were so different. It was unbelievable. All the gay people, gay and lesbian people were just running to San Francisco.
yeah,
That was one reason I went there. It was very important, but I also went there because I'm a poet and I was thinking of the
beat
Beat
team,
legacy.
yeah,
Yeah, I came out in 75 at the University of Colorado in Boulder, Colorado, and I went to university there for 2 years, and then I left. At that point, I came out. I was a lesbian with long hair, and a lot of the other lesbians in Colorado. The uniform was sort of like it was kind of hippie, I guess. It was no dresses, but basically it was jeans and flannel shirts, which were big in Colorado, and these big clutter boots, these big mountain climbing, kind of rugged boots for the snow, and that was it. And earrings. There was earrings. Some people wore a little makeup, but there
wow,
was long hair. Yeah, there was long hair. So for me, it was like I was kind of a hippie, and there were boys wore their hair long too. And I was Native. I was very identified with Native culture, American Indian culture at the time, and so wearing your hair long is a thing. So I'd had long hair as a teenager. Anyway, so you did see that, but I know that, but that was Boulder, Colorado. There were these lesbians at one point who came in from, I wrote about this in the book. They came in from New York City, and they were in some women's orchestra. And of course, they were even more radical from New York, and they had shaved heads, right? And that was like, wow, they've got these shaved heads. Um, the other thing was for me in particular is that I got into punk rock, right? I got into punk. I also got into Tibetan Buddhism, and I was a poet. So I was part of all these different worlds. I wasn't just limited to the lesbian world. And I think that helped me leave. That helped give me a way out because I had already lived part of my life in other milieus. In San Francisco and to some degree in Boulder, but you are right. There was heavy policing. Oddly enough, in that group, even though they were wearing their hair long and everything else, I remember this dance, and it was women and gay men in Boulder, a gay dance, and they were playing. Somebody decided to play "Rebel Rebel" by David Bowie, and this woman got so angry. This lesbian, she got so angry, and she was like, "Tell them to get that off now." Take that shit off now. We are women. We are not, boy or girl. You don't know if you're a boy or a girl. That was out. We are women. Women, So it's really interesting how things changed. And Butch Femme was totally out. That was like a relic from the 50s, is the way we thought of it. You know, apparently in the bars, lesbians were still there was still some butch femme, I guess, in the 70s. But again, it was the people who went to college, it was the feminists who came in, and apparently what they would do in the bars is I've been told this by other people, right? Is that they would dance in a circle holding hands, and they would kind of shun or make fun of the women who were doing butch femme because that was so old fashioned, right? And it was like aping heterosexual roles. Again, this thing of buying into sex roles. Feminism hates that.
Mm.
supposedly, or they hate that. So they saw Butch Femme as like that. So Butch Femme, however, came back in the late 80s. It started making a comeback in San Francisco and I think around the world.
Mm.
Were you around Butch Femme in like the early 90s or
It really, I was so young and so green. Like I remember, like I didn't have a feminist background, even though I come from a really strong matriarchal kind of family. Like there was no feminism; you just got on with it.
right,
So
right.
like even things like the non-monogamous stuff like that was happening,
Uh-huh.
the free love kind of anti-patriarchal non-monogamous
Right.
separatist that whole thing. Like I remember being in the pub at the women's pool comp, and this woman that ended up being my first serious girlfriend was with her then partner, and she was like, "Oh yeah, my partner has affairs," and I was like, "What?" Like I was still thinking that like it was, like women holding hands and skipping along, and like there
Uh-huh.
was no negative, no, like that there was just all sunshine and light, and women wouldn't betray each other. And I kind of, for some reason, had that thought. So they're like, oh yeah, this, my partner keeps having affairs, and I was like, what do you mean, like? And I remember she was like, she has affairs, like, and I'm like,
Right,
yeah,
right.
I know what affairs means, but what I don't understand what you mean. Like, what are you talking about? She's like, she has sex with other people while we're still together, and I'm like, what? Like, I just could not compute that thought at all. Like, it was
Right, right.
like,
That women were cheating on you? Did they
yeah,
consider it cheating, or was it
oh,
like,
they were meant to be a monogamous couple, so it was,
oh,
thing.
right,
But
right,
her partner had come from country, like kind of like a country beatnik kind of lesbian
right,
community kind of scene where
uh-huh,
like monogamy was not the done thing, and then she moved to Sydney,
right,
started out in the lesbian, like this young, just coming out 20s, like 18, 19, 20
right.
something, support group with a whole heap of other people where we were making our first forays into the lesbian
Mm-hmm,
community as a
mm-hmm,
group kind of thing.
mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm.
just not quite understanding that the culture that we were entering was vastly different than what we were expecting it was going to be. Like, I kind of
Right.
into that a little bit lately as well, like listening to, and I mean, it's really well meaning. Like there are whole, like
Mm-hmm,
there's been 30 years of,
mm-hmm.
gay liberation. So there are like almost nobody has a problem, like especially in Australia, like where the land of Mardi Gras and Priscilla, Queen of the Desert. So
Mm-hmm.
homophobia is like rampant homophobia is not really a thing here.
Well,
Um,
that's good. Yeah,
like
that's
in the
great.
culture, and people just they just don't really, like they may not love it, but they don't care enough to, you know what I mean,
Right,
like finding
right.
people that deeply oppose like gay stuff at all is, so there are all of these people that have been to Mardi Gras, like straight people
Mm-hmm,
that have been
mm-hmm,
to Mardi Gras that have gay friends, and they could not care less, and some of them
mm-hmm,
have been up, like bumped right up close against the gay community.
mm-hmm.
And as I'm listening to them talk about their objections to some of this queer theory trans stuff, I've kind of started to realize that they don't quite grasp how different the subculture of the LGB just in itself is, like from heterosexual, you know,
Right,
society.
right.
They have very different values. Like they are not the same
Uh-huh.
thing at all. Um,
Right.
I'm kind of watching people. It kind of dawned on me the other day. I was like, oh, maybe you don't understand this quite as much as you think you do. Like,
You mean straight people, cis
yeah,
people,
yeah,
or
yeah,
okay,
yeah.
okay.
Like
Yeah.
listening to gender critical. I mean, a lot of them just have safeguarding concerns, like, and they've been
Right.
abused, so then they get angry, and it starts to get, elevated in that way. Sorry, people that we wouldn't disagree with on much at all, but they're talking about this stuff, and in the conversations that they have, it's not really, you just kind of get this sense from
Mm-hmm.
their tone or the way they phrase things that they don't quite grasp how different the subculture that they're talking about
Oh yeah, they have no clue.
is.
Yeah. I mean, look how complicated it is. We're talking about I'm a little older than you, so I'm starting in the 70s. And even the lesbian culture had changed from the 70s to the 80s. And well, I was into the punk thing, and that's a whole different thing. And I was around the very first punk lesbians because punks weren't accepted in the lesbian culture. You
Oh
know,
wow.
when I was punked out, yeah, I mean, they were,
Was it
well, yeah, maybe, or it was too aggressive. You know, it was like we walked into the dyke bar at the time, the lesbian bar, which was Amelia's, and we were wearing like leather jackets in 1981, 82, and like spikes. And I had my hair spiked up, dyed black, you know. And then, of course, there were women who were punked out, who were wearing like tiger skin high heels and skirts and makeup. Oh my God, you know. And it was just, there were suburban type dykes in there, suburban lesbians who probably weren't that political. You know, they were generally feminists, but they weren't hardcore lesbian separatists or whatever. But and then there were the more hardcore political people, but they just, nobody would say a word. We'd walk in and it was like you could hear
dead
a pin drop.
silence?
Yeah, they were just like, oh my God, who are they? You know, they're scary looking, you know. So, you know, you go, and then I was hanging out with basically with straight people, right? You know, who were punked out and, you know, living in punk houses. And so there was a whole mixture, you know, going to see bands play. And, you know, I wasn't in the universe of this lesbian world. It was like another world, you know, which where art was foregrounded. And the same thing with, I was going to poetry readings and giving poetry readings at places where it had nothing whatsoever to do with, you know, my sexuality, right? I had read at lesbian events, but then I'd sort of graduated or gone out into the greater literary world, you know, which was a big deal in San Francisco. There was a lot to choose from. But in any case, so I had those influences, but yeah, just look how things have changed in the lesbian world. And then you get into the trans world and, you know, you start having people come, you know, people start hearing about transition, like, you know, whether they saw something in Stone Butch Blues or they heard, you know, about FTMI or meetings, or they saw a trans guy, or maybe they saw the Max movie. I had a lot of trans guys who said they saw the Max movie, which came out we made it in 91. Monica Troit made it in 91, and it came out into the theaters in 93 worldwide. And, you know, there were so many guys after that, trans guys, who would come up to me and say, you know, I saw you in that movie. And that's when I decided, you know. So as soon as the information started getting out there, you know, I think more people started doing this. And then they had to grapple with, you know, usually having that kind of lesbian background, feminist background that you're talking about, and that, you know, I've talked about. And where do we, you know, like, how do we relate to our former communities? You know, because even though, I mean, I did have the lesbian community, even though I also, thank God, had the punk world and everything else, and there were intersections all along the way, right? There was mixing, but you know, I had been a Tibetan Buddhist as well. I had taken refuge with Chogyam Trungpa in
So jealous
1979.
about that. I'm so jealous that you met him.
Uh, oh yeah, yeah, that was my teacher. I didn't know you knew about
I've
him.
been following him, like researching him for like 20, 25 years almost,
Oh
like
wow, wow,
long time.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Wow, I didn't know that. That's great. That's great. Yeah, he was my teacher, and I encountered him first at Naropa. The summer sessions at Naropa, where I would go basically to learn poetry. I took classes with Allen Ginsberg, I think Anne Waldman, and of course it was at Naropa, so I encountered Buddhism. And then I had a girlfriend who was a Buddhist, and I learned how to sit at some point. I was kind of resistant at first, but I learned how to sit. Anyway, so I was lucky in a way. I had so many worlds, and I had a way out of that very, because there's a bit of a straitjacket, I think, in that. I think especially if you're becoming a man, coming out the lesbian community. I mean, men are kind of dirt, right? I mean, they're kind of shit,
Transition.
and yeah, it's let's face it. So you have to encounter that in yourself, and in my opinion, you have to sort of like work at getting rid of that misandry, you know, and seeing things in a different way. And I think it takes years. I
Yeah.
think it takes years. And also you learn, you know, you start empathizing with men as you're treated like a man, and you start seeing that, well, gee, it's not quite this royal road of privilege.
Yeah.
There's advantages and disadvantages, and it's not quite what I thought it was. Not that, I mean, that wasn't why I did it. That was very clear. I know there are people who claim that's why we do this, which is, I think, is insane. It's like, are you crazy? Because like it's more like what you say. In a way, you're giving up a lot. You're giving up a safety of this community and this identity, and you're going into this other thing. You're going out, leaving the lesbian world, and you're like probably not going to have the same friends or as many of them. Or what parties are you going to go to? Are you going to the straight parties? Are you going to gay men's? Are you going to be a gay man? Are you going to,
Yeah.
the whole world is different, right?
Yeah.
So, it's not quite the way they're making it out to be. Our
No.
detractors,
Did you see like, well, the young trans guy that has been posting about he's not detransitioner, but he's kind of a regretter. Have you seen that on Twitter in the last couple of days? Like, I kind of wonder with a lot of, like, because there's this rah rah performance, you can play with this, you can be whatever you want. Like, they kind of,
right?
and because these kids are like, some of these kids are so young, they kind of believe that, and then they start transitioning, and it's a lot of just responsibility, like taking responsibility, and like, men expect a lot from other men, and like that. I kind of wonder with a lot of them how much that also plays a part, because if you transition and you think, oh, I'm gaining privilege and it's going to be easy, you know
Right,
and then you come in and people are looking at you strangely because you can't lift something, or you say the wrong thing, or like you don't
right,
stand up for yourself, or
right.
shit. Like, there can be,
Mhm.
like, yeah, there seems to be a lot of, like, there just are a lot of avenues that aren't really being.
Right. Well, I mean, we do get a lot stronger, though. Your mileage may vary, but we
Yeah.
we start being able to lift this
Yeah.
stuff. What
Yeah.
I remember for me, it was kind of funny. I noticed things like people at my office expected me to fix the pencil sharpener, right? And I'm not mechanical, and I wasn't brought up,
The fix stuff.
like, yeah, I wasn't brought up fixing stuff, right? So I was like, oh, okay. And so you're like, okay, what am I going to do? So I think you learn to fake it. And I did have this one guy, this cis guy, tell me, men never say I don't know. So I mean, and it became revealed to me over time that they're kind of in the same position. Not all
Yeah,
of
they have
them.
no clue either. They
Yeah,
just
they're also like, I don't know how
okay.
to fix the thing, lady. It was a woman who asked me to, and I don't really know, um, but in any case, yeah, I did see that. I think I know who you're referring to, and I guess he was this particular person who has some kind of regret. He introduced himself on Twitter as I am a biological female and I am transitioning, and he was losing his hair,
Yeah.
and so he was upset. And I just thought, well, but he didn't want to detransition. And I was thinking, well,
I, I,
yeah, but
I kind of took it to be like, if it's the same guy, the guy that's in the car
yeah,
with glasses, I don't really want to
yeah,
name.
he has glasses and he looks really
Yeah,
young.
I kind of took that to be kind of like not really a statement on like on for older people or for trans people as such, but more kind of for younger people. Listen, like, I did this thinking that it was one thing, and it has turned out to be another thing entirely. Uh,
Right,
you should think about this a little more before, like, I'm kind of
right,
stuck in this position, and I'm gonna have to make this work. Um,
right.
and figure and conceptualize this. And I wonder how much that will, like, if they manage to do that, that will fix their issue.
What wasn't he, now I only saw this one or two posts, but wasn't it he was worried about like losing his hair? Yeah, he acted like he didn't. I mean, I think that's something we all grapple with, like cis guys, like non-trans guys, they grapple with. I mean, that's why you have the hair club for men, and you have toupees, and you have guys using Rogaine, and I mean, it's something all men have to deal with, and I do think it's kind of a shock, but if you if you come into this knowing, you know that's going to happen. You know that can happen. You're going to look like a man. Men don't have as much hair. Men have hip. That's one of the things that helps you look masculine and changes your face is having a masculine hairline. I'm not talking about being full on bald, but just like mine started going back.
Like
Yeah.
I kind of wonder, like, without, and I was thinking about this the other day, like our generation, it was still quite taboo. Like we kind of knew, even if you did no research or you didn't
Mm-hmm.
like, well, you had to do research because you couldn't find it otherwise. But like the culture of how mainstream society viewed trans, like this was likely to cost you most of the people in your life. It was
Yeah.
likely to cost you family members that would never speak to you again. There was a level of violence that, was anticipated, whether it was realistic or not. In every
Right.
situation, you certainly anticipated it. Like this was kind of a taboo thing to do. So you only
Oh yeah.
went
Oh
down
yeah.
this road if you needed to. Like if
You
you
were.
could make it
Yeah.
work, or you had to think about this a lot before you went down this road.
It was terrifying.
Yeah,
It was
absolutely.
terrifying.
Very,
And
very.
it was like absolutely the way I thought of it was the worst possible thing you could be. You were becoming a freak, total
Yeah,
freak. I mean, in the 80s, probably into the 90s, up until, well, it's still really bad, but it's different now. I think a
yeah,
lot of people it's just more known, and even if people are still confused and there is a backlash, I think there's an effort to be understanding and there is a certain level of sophistication. I mean, I'm contradicting myself, and I think that just shows that I'm confused now. I'm not really sure what people know and don't know. I'm confused about what's going on. That's why you and I connected initially on
mm,
Twitter was I went into Twitter trying to figure out, what is
yeah,
this GC thing? What is what's going on with these detransitioners? I was like very open minded or trying to just do some investigation and because things have changed so much,
mm,
but I think it's a combination of things. On one hand, there's this horrible backlash. On the other hand, there's a lot of positive stuff out there about us. That's why there's the backlash, you
yeah.
know,
Well,
and
I
because
also wonder, like, if you were 14, 15, 16, and like especially what seems to be coming out of America, like social media is just a really poor way to understand exactly what's going on in the world. But
yeah,
it seems to be that there is a lot of celebration and a lot of affirmation and a lot of, oh, this is great. No, no, don't worry about it. Like you will take care of you without spelling out certain things. And it's not quite as taboo as it once was. So you haven't, have these middle class American kids that live in the suburbs bumped into, like I remember being 19 and being a waiter in a cafe that was known as a gay cafe,
hmm
and these trans women, they weren't quite trans women yet. They were on their
hmm
way, but they were like, this was like they were dressing up for the first or second time and going out
hmm
somewhere where they thought they were relatively safe, but they were still terrified, like, and like taking
yeah,
their orders. They took up as little room as they tried to make themselves smaller. There
right,
was one of them
yeah,
that had like shaved the best that they could, but still hadn't had
sure,
electrolysis yet. Had a really bad wig, um, and would keep their hand over their face, like
uh-huh,
completely over their face, while
hmm
like and whispered their, or like if they haven't bumped into that history, then
right,
yeah, like I was watching Camille Paglia and she was like, people don't, like, these kids in her classroom don't know who Moses is. And she was like, well, why would they? Like, why would they know who Moses is? And I kind of thought along the same lines with some of these trans kids that are, or the regretters or the detransitioners that are speaking out now. If they've only been met with really well-meaning, positive affirmation, like it
hmm
haven't been it hasn't quite been spelled out for, like, why would they know?
yeah. I don't know. I'm trying to. it's really hard for me to get a handle on exactly what's happening
Yeah,
with that. Like I think there is a lot of affirmation and positive, obviously some positive support, but I think it's still a huge thing, and a lot of parents really grapple with it, and they're not necessarily happy about it. And from what I've gathered from talking to therapists and reading articles and sort of what I've gleaned, it's still confusing. But there are some therapists who are really skilled, and others who aren't.
yeah.
And there is that. Apparently, there's that thing where people do sign, and they get what they want. However, I don't know that. I don't think that necessarily happens for the kids. It occurred to me today, I think they go through a longer process. They have to cross live. Like we had to cross live, way back, well, back in the 70s, or maybe even before then. When I started transition, that was being phased out. But the idea that you had to cross live as the opposite sex for 2 years without hormones, which is insane,
Oh, it's impossible.
I would think it's impossible.
Well,
And
because you
so,
can't present as a man if you don't, like it changes the way you think, the way you see the world. Like
yeah.
hormones are a big deal. So without them,
Oh, yeah.
transition. So it's catch 22. Like you,
Yeah. Yeah, so I don't even know how people did it, but that was one of the requirements. But we don't do that anymore, but adults, but kids do that. They live socially, most of them, except for the people, I guess there are people who are transitioning, who start their whole, suddenly discover this in their adolescence, you know, and maybe, that may be an issue if they're not presenting as if they didn't express any gender dysphoria as children. I mean, now things have gotten so weird, and again, people are going to get pissed. I'm sure I'm going to say something to offend somebody here, but I'm trying to figure. I'm no expert on this. I don't pretend to have the answers, but I think one of the issues is that trans has become politicized, and which was something I warned about in my memoir a long time ago. I said this is not a political movement. It's a sex change. It's a transition. You can sort of be philosophical about it and go into places with it in your mind, but really it's not a political movement. I saw the danger of that. And so, there's this idea now that you don't need gender dysphoria to be trans. And that to me is like, well, that's not trans then. Maybe that's gender nonconforming. Maybe that's something else. I don't know what it is. And it may be perfectly legitimate, but it's really different from what I've always thought of as trans, and why we started this whole movement, which was it was a movement, like going back to getting the T in the LGB. That was a political gesture, a goal, and that's something that was done. And also, I think for us in the beginning, it was about accessing healthcare, and also accessing insurance, being able to have, restore what Janice Raymond had undone, with the Reagan administration in the 80s, restore that, and also get private insurance to pay for it, and also just sort of have more, instead of it being like becoming this total freak of nature and a bad thing, to sort of have a more positive idea about being trans. Like, you're just a person. There's many people who are like gay people. There's gay people who are terrible people. There's gay people who are amazing people. I think we were moving in that direction. That was the idea of the movement. But on there were also other people who wanted to politicize it and make it against the binary gender system.
mm,
And that is where I think we got sort of stuck
they
into
certainly
something.
won.
They won.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's probably true. Yeah, they kind of won, which is why people like us get kind of marginalized. We get called things like transmedicalist and true scum. I got called a transmedicalist the other day, and then a trans woman, and she blocked me. I thought I was saying right.
Yeah.
I thought I was saying something really
Benign.
benign and supportive of what she was saying, but I said the wrong thing, and so she called me trans medicalist, and
Yeah.
that I was a, what was it, a cis adjacent or something, and I'm
Yeah.
like, whatever, But
Yeah. It gets really weird. Like I find myself like I kind of say what I'm gonna say, but
uh-huh.
I find myself at certain points with trans people being very hesitant about oh my God, I'm going to say this, is this going to get me into trouble? Like, which didn't used to be the case. Like we used to be able to agree to disagree
Right.
vehemently about, like I was in a group of like peer counseling, like this peer counseling support run through the Gender Centre here in
Hmm.
Sydney. Um, and we all started, there was only one person that was a lot older, that was in their 60s, that hadn't been part of the lesbian community, that had known that they were trans for their entire 60 years, had led this really sad, was very embittered, very like professionally successful, but had been alone for their
Right.
entire life because of this.
Wow. Wow.
So it was kind of fucked up in exactly the way
Hmm.
you would imagine. But the rest of us were kind of like in our 20s. There were lots of different,
Right.
we all kind of took the same hormone levels. We had the same, like we all had chest.
Right.
Lower surgery isn't really possible in Australia, or it certainly wasn't back then. It was a really bad idea back then because there was like one guy in Melbourne, I think, that was performing surgeries at that
Oh,
point.
that's
And
interesting.
the one guy that we knew that had phalloplasty also was losing his ability to walk. So we were like, there was
Wow.
whispering about,
Wow.
oh, maybe, mate, like there was lots of, the story was that they had fucked up his ability to walk basically in the phalloplasty. It had rejected, the
Wow.
skin grafts had rejected, and he'd had the same operation twice, and there are all of these,
Right.
all of these
Right.
bad stories, but we didn't know whether they were
Hmm.
true or not.
Right.
So there was a group of 12 to 15, young ex-lesbian, you know, all living within 5 kilometer radius of each other, that, we all had test surgery. We all took full doses of testosterone, except for one guy that took a half dose. Um,
Hmm.
and was doing the genderqueer thing. And we all saw it, like some of us were trans men, some of them were FMs, like that whole how you see yourself, like we all had
Right.
similar ideas but different ideas about
Right.
what this meant. And some of
Right.
them conflicted completely, but we still
Hmm.
all got along and had each other's backs and went out, like what.
Well, that's it. You can't, I think you started this by saying we can't, it's so hard to disagree or anymore. One, you do get that feeling you're walking on eggshells around in trans groups. I mean, there's certain groups online. I don't, there's like two or three groups, I think just two trans men's groups that I'm in. And one of them's older guys, and one of them is guys that I know, and it's a secret group, like people who know each other.
Yeah,
And yeah, because the other groups, well, first of all, I don't really feel as much of a need after over 30 years, right? And you get bored of the same old thing, like, I'm growing a mustache, and everybody's, or whatever, or will I
yeah,
grow a mustache, or people who are, they don't have all these questions. And, every now and then I'll see something on Facebook, it'll come in my feed, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to tell this guy, don't worry. On the other hand, there's so much of this language policing, and I guess some guys get kicked out. I saw this in passing on Facebook. I didn't get involved in the discussion. I thought, don't even go there. But there was some trans man group where FTM group where, well, I guess FTM is called bad, is a bad thing now, but to call it that. But there was some group where this guy was considered to be a bad actor, politically a bad actor because he was too masculine, and he made some he made some remark about how he likes to wear jeans and I like to wear guys clothes, I don't like to wear dresses and makeup. And the rest of them were saying, there's lots of trans guys that are wearing dresses and makeup. And he said, I don't, I'm not saying that's bad, but I'm not into that stuff, right? I kind of just wear the traditional guy clothes. And they were all mad at him. And I saw that and I was like, wow, okay, it's
yeah.
different. It's really different. I'm not sure what's going on. I'm not going to get involved. But, I was curious because I've heard this here and there. I've heard these rumors that there's all these trans men wearing dresses and makeup and, whatever. But I haven't really seen them. I've seen guys who do a little drag here and there. But, I heard in LA, a lot of the guys were wearing glitter on their faces. And, I do see this sort of, again, it's different, but it's also part of this sort of thing of we don't want to have toxic masculinity. And I was going to try this out on your show here. Uh, this insight I have for what it's worth. I see this with guys who are kind of in the GC, they're kind of talking to GC people a lot. They will always say they'll preface their introduction to themselves with, my name is John Doe, and I'm a biological female. You know, and then, and I've been taking testosterone for X years and blah blah blah. What they used to do, and what a lot of the guys do who are more on the left and who don't go into these GC circles at all, don't even try to talk to those people, is they're saying, I'm John Doe, and I know I have white male privilege, but I'm very aware of that. I have male privilege, and I try to, I'm always trying, I'm aware of that as I move through the world. So it's a whole different.
It's the same thing
but
in
but
reverse.
it's the same thing, yeah. So there are these guys who are apologizing for being men, like, I'm a man, but I know I have male privilege. Please don't hate me. I know I've got it. Don't hate me. And of course, they're often, they don't seem like the macho type. Let me put it that way.
Yeah.
And then the other guys, sometimes they are the macho type, sometimes, but they're saying, well, I'm a biological female, because they don't want the GC people to hate their guts and
Yeah.
So that's the way of kind of apologizing and say, look, I know I'm not a real man. Don't come at me. All right. And I refuse. I will not do that. I will not do that. Either thing. I never wanted to do the other thing, the saying I've got the male privilege, and I don't want to do this. I'm a biological female. We shouldn't have to do that. We're trans.
Yeah.
People know what trans. If they don't,
It's
they'll
kind of
figure it out.
self-evident, really.
Yeah, it's self-evident. Yeah, like guess what?
Yeah.
But
It's kind of like that's why I put it in my bio, so I don't have to keep saying the same thing over and over and over again.
okay, yeah,
You
yeah.
know,
But they
like
do it
I'm a
anyway. They
trans
do
guy.
it anyway. Yeah.
I kind of I can appreciate why they do it because they kind of are really opposed to the queer theory stuff and they don't like what they're seeing. And there are some, like I know that you have some questions around a lot of the kids safeguarding puberty blockers kind of, like we've had those conversations as well. So they kind of want to wade in, but there's this policing that happens in the gender critical, a lot, well, not all of them, but a lot of the gender critical spaces where they kind of do this litmus test, like, and check you out before before they'll engage with you, and you have to
Interesting.
continuously say the right thing to be part of the
Interesting.
conversation.
Interesting. That's
Don't do that,
interesting.
then you get booted pretty quickly, like,
Right.
which is kind of
Right.
sad as well. Like,
Right. That's interesting. Yeah.
it kind of shows in one way that both the GCs and the TRAs are both leftist groups because you have to stick to that. They have the same rules. Strangely,
Yeah. Yeah.
both groups have exactly the same. You must stick to the script. There is little room for variation of opinion. Like, you
Right.
have to keep this straight.
And I want to make it clear for the record for
Yeah,
people watching this that I'm not GC. I did explore that, and I didn't even know what it was when I went in, right? I was kind of exploring, like, what is this? And then I figured it out. And at some point, I realized, wow, I'm really, really deeply appalled and opposed to this whole thing. And I have a lot of questions. It's complicated. There's so many strange things going on. There's microdosing, people who are microdosing testosterone. There's the non-binary thing, which I'm not against non-binary. I just think it's different. I
yeah,
think it's different from what we've done. And I think it's important to make that clear. Like, this is really different. I think the non-binary movement, or the group non-binary people, have been the ones who have been behind a lot of the word changes, like um oh gosh, like not saying mother, or there's another one. Well, the pronouns in the bio. I think that's really more non-binary people who have wanted that. Now, not saying mother probably has to do with, and saying birthing person probably has to do also with the tiny, tiny, tiny little percentage of trans men who do have children, right? And I personally, my opinion on that is, in a clinical setting, that's appropriate. You don't want to call this trans guy, he may be offended if you say mother, maybe. Not all of them are, but he might be. So he may want this more neutral term. But I think to just label, to get rid of the word mother is completely insane. I mean,
Yeah, there's a
it's,
big
it's,
difference
to,
between being aware and using it in certain instances,
yeah.
like to be thoughtful and wallpapering the world with it. Like there's
And that's
kind
what
of, you know,
Yeah, that's why people hate us.
yeah,
I mean, people are starting to hate us. Even people who were kind of friendly towards us are starting to sort of like feel like we're a big drag. These trans people, they want us to not say mother. They're crazy. They want us to, they were protesting the vagina monologues. There was a protest of the vagina monologues because I think they were saying some men have vaginas, some women don't have vaginas. I mean, who cares?
yeah,
I mean, it's like it's bullying. It's kind of silly. There's other ways of making that point with our own art. If we want to make, I mean, we have our own. We can write from our own voices. We can write more books and have people with all kinds of body parts.
yeah,
So we don't have to go shitting on other people's stuff.
yeah.
And I think that's how people are perceiving us, and they resent it, and they don't like. Most people do not like putting their pronouns at the end of their emails, or it's an imposition. And I actually, most transsexuals, people like us, many of them don't like it. I refuse to do it.
I've had to go for a few checks lately, like the yearly check kind of thing. Um, and the specialist asked me what my pronouns were. He did it last year, and then he did it again this year. First time he did it, I just was like, "Have you what? Have you
Oh
been
no.
saying something? What are you?" And then I kind of realized, and I was like, "Oh."
Right, right. Like what am I doing wrong? Did I do something different?
It's
Yeah,
so
it's so confusing. We're confused. I mean, it's so confusing. It's like, and you can't, I'm not quite sure who's writing these rules or who's pushing these ideas. I think sometimes they get blown up too. The turfs blow them up, but it is happening. I mean, at the university where I just got my degree at CU, I heard that now it's being required that the staff puts their pronouns in their email, and probably some people don't mind. They're virtue signaling. They think that makes them look like they're really sophisticated and pro trans. But then other people are like, they just don't like it.
yeah,
So, and again, it's ironic because a lot of trans people don't like it. And so we'll be in the position of, I know a friend of mine who works at he works at a library somewhere, and he has been asked to use his, to join in these pronoun circles where they ask each other their pronouns. And he refuses to. He's a transsexual man. He transitioned like probably around the time you did. And, you know, um, he just doesn't want to do it. He feels like it brings him back to that time when he was more ambiguous and it was a source of pain.
mm,
People asking, "What are you?" You
yeah,
know, and the people, and so his coworkers, a lot of them are non-binary, but they're cis women, they're non-trans women, cis women who are wearing earrings and long hair and makeup sometimes, and they're married to men, and they are calling him transphobic. So
so insane. Like
it's so
it kind of feels like when I first, because I wasn't really on Twitter at all.
yeah,
Then I kind of got wind that this stuff had started happening, or that this is well underway.
yeah,
Jumped on Twitter, and before I kind of, for the first couple of weeks, I basically just had, Charles handing my ass to me and telling me that I had no idea what I was doing, that I needed to educate myself about trans stuff, that they were all like 19-year-old white boys in college in America. And it's
oh
like,
my
like
god,
it's kind of, a lot of this stuff is, some of it is non-binary stuff. I think a lot of it is thinking that this is the right thing to do and the moral thing to do. So they're doing it on behalf of other people. Like they're kind of thinking that they're being well-meaning and doing the right thing, and they don't quite see that they're kind
oh,
of
you mean in
forcing
educating
everything.
us?
yeah, like forcing everybody else's hand if you don't want to go along with it. And there's this,
Right. Yeah.
why wouldn't you want to go along with it? And it's like, well,
Yeah.
I
Oh,
don't
yeah.
want to be forced into doing something whether I want to do it or not. Like,
Right. I don't even understand it. Why do I have to say this thing
no,
or this preposterous thing? A birthing person, or they are doing it with guys too. I guess I once heard this term penis bearer in some. It was in
like
some
it comes
medical.
on a little cushion with, like
Yeah, right. The
flags and
penis
things.
bear, right? And here's the penis bear. I'm like, you got to be kidding me!
Yeah.
Like they're calling men penis bears. I mean, it's. I don't think this is going to catch on, but it makes people. Maybe it will, but I don't think so. I think it just makes people dislike us
Yeah.
because they blame trans people. Because most people have no clue. They're like, God, these crazy trans people. Uh, and
Yeah.
there are some trans people, obviously, who are kind of who are more on the left and who are pushing this. I mean, apparently, I'm not sure who all they are, but yeah, there's the non-binary contingent, and I think it's just sort of starting to be like the chattering class. This is what you believe in. And these are the terms you use if you're an educated good person, if you're a good person. uh so not like those others, this adjacent trans medicalists, I don't know. The whole thing is so crazy. I think the truth is most trans people, like us, we want to live our lives. I don't see one of my objections to the whole GC thing is I don't see, I've watched, we've talked about,
Yeah.
I want people to know.
Mm.
Kevin and I have been talking on Twitter for a while, for like a year now, about all these crazy videos that are anti-trans and or critical or GC. Some of them are more intense than others. Some of these people are just like completely, going on and making fun of us and saying the most vile things I've heard said about transsexuals in my life, you know. And, like we won't name the names, we don't want to publicize them, but it's awful. It's absolutely horrible. And it's that's kind of shocking to see to see people like out there on YouTube saying these god awful things. But basically it's we've been talking about this, and there's a gamut, of different, opinions. Yeah. So the GC stuff at some point, I went in open minded because I have issues with some of the trans activism, like what I'm saying, like the pronouns, this, the penis bearers, and I had questions about the detransitioners and so on, and about child and teen transition. But it was very evident to me pretty quickly. I started seeing, all these individuals, some of them were trans men who were calling trans women, like saying 60% of them had AGP and basically saying they were perverts, right?
Mm.
And kind of going along with this turf line about trans women. And so my first thought was, I'm not going to throw trans women under the bus. I'm not going to join in with this.
Mm.
My thought now about trans kids is, I mean, I was a trans kid. So I'm not going to throw trans kids under the bus either, you know. But I will say that, obviously great care needs to be taken, and I don't have all the answers to this. I'm trying to figure it out. Um, But I am very alarmed when I hear about these hospitals that are getting all these bomb threats now. This is moving to another level. It's not
Yeah.
just people like questioning childhood transition, or should we give them this, or when should we start hormones? Should we use blockers? But it's people being threatened, and lives being threatened, hospitals being threatened.
Yeah.
So that really freaks me out. And then, seeing people like Jordan Peterson, what he said about Elliot Page, and to me, it wasn't a problem like, oh, he's just misgendering Elliot Page, which is, that's bad, but it was more what he said about Elliot Page, quote, cutting off her breasts and the Nazi doctors that mutilated her body, something like this. And characterizing our doctors, characterizing them as Nazi doctors. Um, that to me is like, that is wrong. It's setting us all up. We're being dehumanized. The people who care for us are being dehumanized. The parents of trans kids are being, I've heard them called all kinds of names. Um, I think this is a really, really bad trend, and it scares me because we're in perilous times for other reasons. Economically, we're practically on the verge of a nuclear war with Russia. I mean, we're in perilous times, and with all the inflation and there's so many things going on that have nothing to do with trans people, but I can see us being set up as scapegoats. And I'm afraid, for the first time, you asked me this question earlier, but I think I'm giving a better answer now. I'm kind of scared. I'm afraid of this dehumanization, and people are. I remember what I was saying earlier. What I meant, what I was starting to say was, what's missing from this picture with the GC people is that trans people are human beings. And sure, there are some GC people I think who give a nod to that. They're not all horribly nasty, but I think that's missing is that most of us are doing relatively well, and we're people. We have our flaws, but a lot of us are really great people. We contribute to our communities, and this is being lost. And what I encountered when I was talking to GC people online on Twitter last year, and these people, I would try and dialogue with these women who were anti-trans, who were kind of turfish, and they would tell me I was lying. Like, I'm 65, but I'm in great health.
There's this weird idea that they've read stuff on the internet, so they know more than than we do.
Right.
And it's this weird thing, like fourth wave or third wave feminism. I kind of think second wave as well, but I'm willing to give them the benefit of the doubt. They kind of do this thing where it's like they by trying to empower, they're trying to empower women, and then they do all of these things, and all of the talking points kind of make out like women are these like they're not empowered, brilliant, vital, capable human beings.
Right.
They're frail, and like they need our help, and
Right.
they need to boost up. And it's kind of like that with the trans thing as well. Like you it doesn't matter that Elliot was well into their 30s, and I'm sure it wasn't any surprise to you. Like it wasn't a surprise to me when Elliot or when Ellen came out as a lesbian, and it certainly wasn't a surprise to me when they then announced that they were going to transition, because there was always something about, like, there's something about this. When you meet enough trans guys, and you meet trans guys that are out living their lives, that are not particularly visible because they're busy doing other things, that they don't care about social media, they're living their lives. So like the majority of trans people that are just like you and me, that are completely invisible because they're not speaking.
Right.
But there's this idea that we're not capable of making our own decisions, or that we don't know what we're doing, or we're going to regret this. It's been 33 years, but you're about to regret this any minute now.
Right.
And it's like I'm fully well aware that I have probably shortened my life by a couple of years. Like I knew that before I started. I've known
that's
because I accepted that risk.
Well, that's because men don't live as long as women.
Yeah.
It's not because, I don't think it's the testosterone. I think it's because men, when you go into this, I mean, the
arteries.
Yeah, it can. Yeah. You're more prone to things that men get. Men get heart disease. Men tend to not live as long. What's interesting is it can work in other ways where there are trans men who, because of testosterone, they lost some of their immune disorders that they had. When they were female. I know I didn't get as many headaches,
Yeah, same. So I used to get cluster headaches, but I hardly ever do now.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, I do get migraines. My brother got migraines. My grandfather got migraines. So I still get that, but yeah, I don't get the cluster headaches, which tend to be, that's more female, I guess. I mean, migraines can be too, but so it's not like right across the board, but it depends again on your genetics. The fact that my brother got them, he got them worse than I did. He got them worse than anyone else in the family. My brother Steve. But in any case, yeah, there's things like that they never mention. There was a person who said I think they had Crohn's disease, and they don't have it anymore. I mean, there's so there's there's advantages too, besides, of course, you can run faster and you can lift more weights. And, so there's, there's great things that happen health
Yeah, there's
wise,
positives and negatives, just like everything else in life.
yeah, yeah.
And
Just like
it kind of becomes clear, like it really wasn't a surprise to me when Elliot Page said that they were going to transition, because there's something at the bottom of this. There is a running theme that goes through, like there's a sensibility or an energy that I like. It's not really an energy, but there's something about pretty much every trans guy that I have met in real life that we
mhm,
share. There's something that
yeah,
share, and it's not an outlook. It's
yeah,
just some instinctive thing that I
right,
can't quite name, but like
right,
there is something at the bottom of this that, like medical, like science has enabled us to transition, and that
yeah,
is, I'm so thankful for that. Like I can't
right,
express how
right,
I am for that,
right.
but
I
there
think
is a
that's it.
reason
Is
why
that
this exists. Like,
Yeah, yeah. Like,
I
well,
can't
these people,
really say
a lot of the GC people, maybe not all of them, but a lot of the GC people, I think they don't understand this, and they're attributing it to all these things like, gender roles, which is an old idea. I kept telling some of these, I kept telling certain people on the internet, on Twitter, no, when I was arguing about this is not, I encountered this idea like in 1976, or, and I thought that the feelings I had had when I was young of being male were because of the patriarchy. Well, that didn't last. So there's more. It's deeper than that, and it's not like wanting to be a rabbit one day or wanting to be a choo choo train when you're a little kid, or something like that. I mean, I think people don't always give trans kids the credit.
this is part of the problem of what is like the GCs do have, they do have a point in the safeguarding realm, because there was this girl that
Mm-hmm.
had mental health issues, and her parents were like, listen, and she came home and announced she was really a boy, because they're kind of believing the queer theory stuff and then concretizing it, and
Well, yeah.
in ways that are unhelpful. So the parents were like, okay, well, this is really interesting. And they didn't tell her no, and they weren't abusive in any way, shape, or
Yeah.
form. They were like,
Yeah.
listen, like we've heard bad
Mm-hmm.
things about this gender center, so we would prefer to send you to a proper psychiatrist, because there are
Mm-hmm.
also, mental health. So we would prefer you to go there, and we're going to pay for that. And if
Mm-hmm.
this eventuates, then of course we'll support you, but let's go do this first. The kid freaked
Mm-hmm.
out, ran away. The
Mm-hmm.
police got involved, designated the family as abusive. The parents were
Wow.
abusive, removed the
Wow.
child from the parents' house, but parents have no, like they don't have any legal avenue, because of because the safeguarding has been demolished. If you say
Right.
you are
Right.
trans, no matter what happens,
Right.
um,
Yeah.
the parents have no legal rights to stop it. So
Right.
yeah,
See, they're doing it the opposite now in the states, where I guess in Texas, Governor Abbott just
yeah, that's
is trying to get rid of, take kids away from people who do any kind of gender affirming care for their kids. So, I mean, that's insane. And
yeah,
there's other laws that they're trying to pass, I think in Idaho, where if somebody goes to another state, parents go to another state, like say that they go to Colorado to get gender affirming care of some kind, like hormones or therapy, even. They are going to be put in jail for life.
yeah, which is
That's what they're, which is insane. I don't think they passed it, but it was proposed.
mm,
I mean, that's got to be unconstitutional too. That's
yeah,
insane. But I think I'm against both those laws. Both, obviously you shouldn't take kids away. I mean, it would have to be you would have to really prove abuse to take kids away from any situation. Are they what's going on? If they're just saying no, you cannot take. I don't want you to take testosterone until you're 18. I think that's what that's perfectly reasonable.
mm,
It may not be what the kid wants, but
yeah,
I mean, that's a sticky thing. But I don't think we can totally and completely just say parents have no say.
yeah.
I mean, that wouldn't be right. That's not going to fly. That's not going to work in society. It's just,
Yeah, which is
um,
why the GC, like a lot of these GC women, are going off their absolute heads, because they know that this stuff is happening from their perspective, they don't understand this trans thing, like our trans thing,
Right, right,
at all. They don't like it. Then the safeguarding stuff started happening, and they started looking into the scientific data, and we don't really fully comprehend what's going on with adults, let alone what's going on with kids. So they then they're really angry and freaked out as well because of the safeguarding. So that they do this thing where it's like, we can't find the reason why this exists. There's no scientific evidence that we
which isn't
accept.
true.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's not
which
true
is right,
that
which they accept.
they
Right,
accept. So
right,
therefore, this isn't a thing, and it's all trauma, and it's all abuse, and there's nothing to it, and
right.
we need to end this, which is not,
Which is wrong. I think that's just wrong. I understand. I empathize in a sense. Or sympathize with
yeah,
them, but I think that's just wrong, and it's not helping. However, I will say it does seem to me that there are clinics. Apparently, there are situations where people are coming in and they're signing. Maybe this is when they're over 18. There is the
yeah,
informed consent thing, and that may not always be right. I have a friend of mine who did it, and he was fine,
mm,
but he was older, a little older,
yeah,
you know, and knew what he wanted, had done all the research. But yeah, I think they should sit you down and talk to you. And I know Xander, Xander talks about how you need to do an assessment
yeah,
with anybody. Like, let's see, is the person, you need to rule out things like, are you this person's schizophrenic, which isn't to say that a schizophrenic can't also be trans, but they have to make that
yeah.
distinction. Like, is this
I
trans thing, is this real dysphoria, or is this a delusion, a
Yeah,
schizophrenic delusion?
I really like that social psychosocial profile thing that he
Yeah,
talks about,
yeah,
because it is basically a snapshot, and it's like,
yeah.
okay, so if someone is schizophrenic, or they are autistic, or
Mhm.
they have depressive issues, or whatever the issue is, then you can funnel them into support systems that will help them progress with that, help
Right,
support them in that. And then if they also want to transition and everything's, you know what I mean? It's like,
right,
you know,
right. Because
taking this snapshot and then funneling people off
right,
to the
right,
services that they
right,
need for the
right.
next step, rather than a yes or no. But the other problem with that is that with the Planned Parenthood thing, like kids talking about, I spent half an hour on the phone with Planned Parenthood and they said
That's so
yes, and that's a really bad thing. But if they had spent 5 minutes on the phone with Planned Parenthood, or 5 minutes in a meeting with Planned Parenthood, and Planned Parenthood had said no, then they just go
uh-huh.
to the next doctor. So it's like they'll just doctor shop until they get the diagnosis that they want.
Right. That's something I think I was trying to explain that to a friend of mine that, trans people in general have done that. They will, if you hear something from one doctor, they're not going to give you your testosterone. They're going to make you go through a big song and dance for a year explaining why you can't stay a lesbian, say. You're going to try and find somebody else,
Yeah,
So, but yeah, I think there must be a problem, because I keep hearing this over and over again, that there are places like, I guess, Planned Parenthood, where, it's just a very short call, or you go in and you're not really assessed. And obviously, this is a really serious thing. Like Lou Sullivan said, this is the most important decision you will make in your entire life.
yeah,
Don't take it lightly. And so it's something you have to live with for the rest of your life. And with the same thing with the sex change, as they used to call it, with the
yeah,
gender trans, this is huge. So
yeah,
don't take it lightly. I do think there's a little bit, maybe people are a little too casual, a little too affirming sometimes. Some people, maybe, that, like you said, Planned Parenthood. Because I've heard that. I don't know how much time we've got, but I've got a weird story about Planned Parenthood. Um, in 2016, no, it was 2011. I moved back to Colorado from San Francisco, where I'd lived for decades and where I transitioned. I moved back to Colorado to the Denver metro area. So it's not like Podunk, right? Major metropolitan area. And I was trying to figure out, where do I get my testosterone? So I think someone had said, call Planned Parenthood. So I did. And they said, this is in 2011. They said, we you have to have a letter from a therapist, and you have to, I think it was, you have to pay $360. And I was like, well, I've got a letter, but it's in storage, or I'm not sure where it is. I think I lost it, and I really had lost my
About
letter,
30
my
years
surgery
old.
letter. Right. Right, right. Yeah, exactly. And it was like, by that point, it was like 25 years ago. And I've written a book. I'm in movies, and that she could hear my voice. And I'm like, look, I did this years ago. It's done. It's a done deed. It's not like I'm just coming in off the street. So it doesn't matter. You have to have a letter, and you have to pay $360. And, I think there may have been another requirement. And I was just like, are you kidding me? Or if you don't have the letter, you have to see a therapist for 6 months. I'm like, are you kidding me? And I said, you can look up my book. I wrote about this. I said, you can hear my voice, but
Yeah,
they were just like, so they have really changed.
yeah.
But there's got to be a middle ground. It sounds like they made it like, okay, you call us on the phone. You've never done this. We don't even know who you are. We don't know anything about you. Come on down. We'll give you a prescription. I mean, that's not the way. I
No.
definitely, I know there are trans activists who thinks that that's the way. And I think that's completely wrong. It's coming back. That philosophy is coming back to bite us in the ass,
Yeah.
you
Well, and
know?
I also think like they kind of do this thing, you like I shouldn't have to go through all of these hoops for people to appreciate who I am. And it's kind of a bit, or for, like to prove who I am to people. And it's kind of
Right.
like, this is a really big process. And this is going to be like, no matter how stable you are or how much counseling you have, you don't have this under control in the way that you think you
Yeah.
do. This is going to
Yeah. Yeah.
disrupt your life and change your life
Right.
in ways
Right.
you currently can't comprehend. Like
Right.
until you start the hormones, you just can't underestimate. Like you are underestimating that. So
Right. Right.
doing a little
It's,
bit of therapy is
mhm,
probably going to be really helpful because people are just,
right.
like you start taking the testosterone and things start changing and people keep calling you she and she and she and she and she, and then a few he's start popping up, and then the day comes very quickly before you're ready where everyone is calling you he and looking at
Right.
you like with expectant disbelief of why you don't know what they are expecting you to do. Like
Yeah. Why
it's
you don't know how to fix the pencil sharpener, or you don't,
yeah, like
yeah, yeah,
having someone to like a group of people or a person where you can go and explore what all of this means. Like was I didn't have to do any therapy, but she had enough trans guys that were starting transition at that or exploring transition at that point, and she thought, you know what, like why don't I just we'll do a peer group therapy situation, see
uh-huh.
how it goes. And it was so beneficial,
That's
so
great. That is
beneficial.
really great. Yeah.
People just start,
Well,
you know what I mean? Like you don't quite realize that the people that you work with, especially if they don't really know, or people on the streets or at the shops, or that they just start expecting you to behave differently. Like there are,
right. People don't smile at you as much. It's just different. Like guys can be kind of chummy, but it's so different. Women, when you're walking on the street, women might cross the street,
yeah,
or women are going to be a little, there's more distance there if it's a woman you don't know. And, you don't have as much of a, it's really different. There's more distance with women, and you kind of, I never really thought about that, but of course that happens, and all these things. I think really what you were doing was great because it was a
yeah,
peer group. Because I think that's one of the things that's missing is having a peer group. I mean, a therapist is good too, but also having a peer group and having trans men around, maybe in different stages, who can mentor, younger trans guys, younger in transition, but also, you can share your stories in a peer group. With FTMI, we had that,
yeah,
and we were always talking, and we're talking about transition for the first like 5 years. Of course, you're driving everyone crazy because you're so excited,
yeah.
but you're also, it's also kind
Well,
of scary, but
it's
it's
so
exciting.
complex that like for
Yeah.
the first 5 years, there's so many different Like there are so many different avenues,
Yeah.
and like it changes so much about the day-to-day life and about how you
Yeah.
view things and about how you think about, like the way my thinking is structured is so completely different now than it used to be.
Right.
Like
Right.
that,
Like it changes you
yeah,
and it changes how people treat you
you know,
both.
like just having a home base where you can go to explore this stuff without driving everybody else in your life absolutely
Right. Right.
crazy. And there will be
Right.
things that this brings up that you are not expecting. Like
Right.
like there's I kind of think like it's well meaning, there shouldn't be any barriers between me and this treatment kind of is coming from a good place, and I appreciate why, like, I can understand that.
Right. Yeah.
I just think that it is a little naive, like it is a little naive to think that you can do this
Yeah.
on your own with no
Right.
support, and it's not like it's a big deal, like
Yeah.
it's a
Yeah.
very
It's huge. And apparently there are people coming in who don't know what they're getting into, or even if they do, even if they're really trans, I've heard some of these detransitioners retransition,
yeah,
and probably, they were getting all kinds of, they didn't have the support they needed. I mean, it would be really hard now too, if going on social media, seeing all this weird stuff. Like, in our time, I knew people were thinking weird things sometimes about what I was doing,
yeah,
but I didn't see it. I didn't go somewhere and sit there for hours and see all this this horrible stuff.
yeah, it's
I mean, that would be
dehumanizing.
really, really hard. I mean, it's hard enough sometimes now. Some of these people that we know on YouTube who dedicate their lives to making, fun of trans people and saying really vile things,
Yeah,
you know. I mean, that would be really hard as a young person to see that if you're transitioning. So yeah, it's interesting. So yeah, it's a really different landscape now, you
yeah.
know.
It can be, it's very confronting, and it can also be very hard to realize and keep in the front of your mind that when people are talking about trans online at the moment, or even on in media at the moment,
Hmm.
we are relics from another time. Like they are not talking about, we are
Yeah,
not
that's
what
probably
they
true.
have in mind when they're talking about trans stuff now. What they're talking
Right.
about
Huh.
is, the trans protesters that you see, or the trans activists that you see, like these
Right.
kids that can be,
Right.
they start ranting or being a bit unhinged, and someone shoves a
Right.
camera in their face, and then
Right.
it's the next thing you know,
Right.
it's plastered all over the internet. Like
Right.
that is what people are talking about when they're talking about this. They're not, you know,
That's true.
and
That's true.
because it's a subculture, and it was a subculture that existed in the shadows for a very long, like this is similar to the gay community. Like these subcultures have been slowly ticking over and building up in in the shadows for the
Hmm.
better part of a century at this point. So
Right. Right.
very
At
different
least.
cultures and very different internal
Hmm.
dialogues that may or may not be very obvious to people that have never experienced this, or that they think they
Right.
understand they think they understand. I was having a chat to a lawyer. She was like, "Oh, I've got this gay friend, and we're talking, and like there is a gay couple, and they were kind of saying, like if one of them got sick, that they would absolutely like they've exchanged vows, or they're legally married or something, like they're committed to each other, but they sleep with
Hmm.
other people." And they were like, yeah, like if one of us got sick and was infirm, then the other person would absolutely, nurse them and care for them and make sure that they had everything that they need. I love this person,
Hmm.
they are my life. But they're not
Hmm.
going to. That's not going to stop me from, going out and having sex partners and like living
Right.
my life.
Right.
Like,
With men, gay men.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Hmm.
and she
Yeah.
was really shocked by this. She was like, "What do you mean you wouldn't be, faithful to your
Right.
sick partner?" And I was like, "Yeah,
Right.
completely different. Like, it's
Right, right. Some of them are, but yeah, there's a lot of them
you know
that
what I mean? Like,
gay
there is a
men who
lot of
are.
that.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah. It's different. It's a different culture. Well, we're talking about two men,
Yeah,
first of all,
yeah.
right?
Well, I mean,
So
even there are lesbians that that I know that are like that as well. Like, these are
really,
very different cultural, values and cultural
yeah,
understandings, and this
yeah.
is a movement
Let
that's been around for like a long time. And
Yeah, lesbians I know tend to be more like serial monogamy.
yeah,
You know, so they yeah, but unless
start-based
they're like into
relationship.
BDSM or something, and then
Yeah,
they have play partners and so on. And then of course there's poly people who can be straight but well, they're not straight. They're always bi poly and looking.
they always have a mullet for some reason.
Oh, a mullet. Well, not in San Francisco. Not in San Francisco, thank God.
Yeah,
Even though they'll probably come back. They'll come back, I'm sure.
yeah,
It'll have its time,
yeah,
again. But yeah, yeah, these cultures are coming now out of the shadows. I don't know any other way to put it, but weird things like adult babies and these adult babies who cross dress, and people see that and they're like, oh, trans person, that's a trans person.
yeah.
Right, which is kind of what you mean. Or in that they don't necessarily think of people like us. I think they're vaguely aware that there are trans people who are just people, but they're seeing or they're seeing these people in Antifa who are like with the sign and the protest, and they're not even on estrogen or testosterone or very little, or then there's the microdosing, and then there's the self-identification, which is a whole other thing, where you're having these, I guess apparently there are these guys running around who are just saying they're women or they're trans, and they haven't really done that much,
Yeah,
so
you just have to say you're trans and you're trans.
yeah, that whole thing. So yeah, and people see that and they were already kind of confused, and they're even more confused, and of course that's sensationalized. That's what people are like us are kind of boring, so that's people are like, wow, look at this, there's this person who's 50 years old and they're dressed up in a baby doll dress in a crib, and
Yeah,
they're born male, and they still they still look kind of male, and their adult baby named Sue. So wow, they're a trans person.
yeah. And never
Even
mind
though
that that picture came from, the darkest, deepest recesses of, some weird Reddit thread or the dark web.
right,
Like it gets splashed all over
right,
Twitter and
right,
it's the rage
right,
for a week. And,
right,
you only have to see three or four of those things before you are outraged, blood boiling, and therefore, like kind of the lizard brain takes over because it is so outrageous that you kind of
right,
start losing your critical thinking skills, and you see,
right,
a few people that have been doing crazy, 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 crazy nonsense, or a dozen people that are
right,
doing crazy
right,
nonsense, and
right.
how big the world is too big for us to actually conceptualize, and it's like there's so much happening at one time that
Right. Right. And I'm not necessarily, look, I'm from San Francisco, so
yeah,
I've been familiar with this crazy stuff for a while, and
yeah,
I'm not against people doing kink. I think it's kind of interesting. It's fascinating. It's
yeah,
really
but it's not
interesting.
mainstream
But
media.
but it's not mainstream. And it's not like it gets blown out of proportion instead of just this kind of weird little thing that some people do. Yeah, it gets blown out of proportion. And
Yeah, and then we
you
have
know,
these things, and people are giving them to their kids, and
oh,
it's
right,
very easily accessible, and it's
right, right.
it is damaging to kids. Like there are a lot of social issues that need to be resolved. At the
Right. Right. Yeah, I don't know. That's probably, I was more on the conservative side on that, but I think I got so disgusted with these GC people. They were so hateful
mm,
that I started rethinking things. And I thought, well, look, the fact is, no matter that I'm a classic liberal politically, which, I believe in individual rights, but really I've never been a true social conservative. So, I mean, I think it's true. There are some things which are not appropriate to children. We can
yeah,
definitely agree on that. There's no question, and, so parents have to take responsibility for that.
mm,
But there's also a certain kind of moral panic that's happening right now
yeah,
around certain things like Drag Queen Story Hour or whatever. And I know the person who started Drag Queen Story Hour. So yeah, she started Drag Queen Story Hour, but I think that the story behind that these people who are outraged don't see is that gay people are getting married now, right? They're getting married and they're having children,
yeah,
and they want entertainment for their kids that's kind of queer.
yeah,
And so that's where she got the idea of, I want to send my little boy I don't want him to just have a boring story hour at the library. Why don't we have drag queens reading stories? It was totally innocent. It
Yeah.
was like, I just want my little boy to have some fun thing to go to. And it's become this monstrous moral panic.
Nightclub kind of, yeah, I think that that has gone too far. Like I have like friends that are lesbian couples that, had not IVF baby, but they use donor babies. And so they
Yeah.
have, and like my friends made a very, and because in Australia, the donors that will at that time, it's like 15 years ago now, the donors that would allow lesbian couples to access their sperm were limited. So it ended up being that there were two or three or four or five lesbian couples that
Uh-huh.
were in the same city that used the same donor that
Oh
had,
my God.
and then
That's
they,
crazy.
because there are studies saying that these kids, if these kids then meet at adulthood, um, there's an attraction because they
Yeah.
are half siblings, so they are drawn
Right.
to
Oh
each
my
other.
God.
And if they
Right.
don't know they're half siblings, then they can mistake that drownness as a sexual thing. So like,
Right.
there've been sociological studies on that. So these parents went out of their way to find as many of the other kids as they possibly could, and they did,
Yeah.
rainbow family
Interesting.
camping trips where
Uh-huh.
like there were four lesbian couples with all of these
Uh-huh.
kids, and
Yeah.
other families, and like
Uh-huh.
drag story. Like these kids are queer family kids, so they're trying to
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
positive, influence, like you are, like you're not part of the mainstream culture per se, but you
Right.
have this vibrant, exciting, dynamic
Yeah.
culture that you are.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
And I think that
Exactly.
has kind of it's gotten a little bit out of control. Like, some of the stuff that you see on Twitter, with kids that, you know, pinning dollar bills into G strings is like,
Yeah. Yeah, that might, when I first saw that, again, I've been whatever. But yeah, it that I probably wouldn't, that might be objectionable. I don't think Michelle's stuff was
no,
like that.
but
It's
that's not
just
where it
it's yeah.
started out. Like
Yeah,
it didn't
yeah.
start
But
there.
now
It
it's gotten like that. Now
was,
I
yeah,
but I don't necessarily think it's we're very uptight about sex in this culture. We're very puritanical. Maybe Australia isn't as bad, but
no, no,
America was
we're not
yeah,
quite as bad as America, but we're not far behind you.
yeah, yeah. We were founded by Puritans, and it's still there.
We
But
did this thing. I wasn't allowed to watch any T. I was not allowed to watch Doctor Who. I wasn't allowed to
wow,
watch, like any of the soaps, Home and Away. I was not allowed to watch anything as a kid. The only
wow.
show I was allowed to watch as a child was MASH, which has so many
Oh,
sexual relevant like references in it. It's
right.
ridiculous. But they all
Uh,
went completely over my head. Like we had no
yeah,
idea. Like
yeah,
hot lips. Like we had
yeah,
like we knew that
yeah.
it was kind of a bit risky, but we
Right,
didn't
right.
calculate it. But at the same
Yeah,
time,
it doesn't mean the same thing to a kid.
no. But at the same
Yeah,
time, if they're
yeah.
like with the iPhones and like there's so much porn just on Twitter. Like
Well, yeah, there's porn. I've run up with porn on. Yeah, I'm not looking for it on Twitter, but
yeah,
it'll pop up, and I'm like, what the hell is that? I'm not in that mood now. Let's get rid of that.
yeah.
It's
But
kind of it's like
like I feel for parents right
yeah,
now because they are
yeah,
damned if they do, damned if they don't. Like, can you
right,
imagine
right.
trying to negotiate a safe environment
It
for your
would be hard.
in this
Yeah, especially as the kids got a little older. But yeah, it would be hard, with the internet. But I think people should be a little smarter about this. The
yeah,
drag queen should be a little smarter. There's probably nothing wrong at all with like sashaying around. And I mean, when I was a kid, I watched I watched Tarzan and Jane, and they're scantily clad, and they're hanging in the trees, and I mean, I think kids have they're not sexual the way adults are, but
no,
it's not like you hit 18 years old and all of a sudden you're sexual. Oh my God, what
yeah,
happened?
there is that
It's
slow dawning over
yeah,
decades of
yeah. Yeah. And you're rehearsing when you're a child, you're kind of rehearsing, like because I wanted to be Tarzan, so you're kind of rehearsing. And I've known women who, they saw Dudley Do Right, like rescuing the maiden,
yeah,
on the railroad tracks. So even though they didn't have sex in their mind exactly exactly when they were 9 years
Just
old, but they were
stand
like,
up
yeah,
straighter and can't take their eyes off it. Yeah.
yeah, like it somehow fed something in them that over time matured into an adult sexuality,
Yeah.
So, it's interesting. It'll be interesting. I think in a way, this generation of kids on the other hand will be like really more sophisticated.
I think they're probably going to be very conservative.
Oh, really? Well, yeah, that could happen too, right? Because somebody like me and you were brought up more conservatively. I mean, my I may have been watching Tarzan, but I was brought up Catholic, right? So, I mean, actually, the damage I got around sexuality, the damage was from the Catholic Church. It was from conservative sources, the shaming about sexuality and so on, and that I spent years trying to get rid of that. So, and apparently it's still alive and well. There's tons of people out there who think that's perfect and that's good. I mean, I do think you have to like teach kids an appropriateness around sexuality, and you do have to teach them about consent, in some way, shape, or form. I don't know if you use that word exactly, but it has to be communicated. Overly shaming kids would be really bad too. So anyway, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a whole new world. It'll be interesting. Yeah, they might end up being really conservative. These kids who were exposed to the drag queens and the
think it's really interesting because I'm making the same journey as you on the political front as well. Like going from I was never communistic, but I was definitely a socialist kind of greenie, and I'm now, you know, kind of thinking. I don't think that schools should be teaching, apart from the very basics of sexual education. I think that like too much there's too much, oh, we can't trust the parents to take care of, like, then there's a balance there that we seem to either go that way or that way, and we need
yeah,
to kind of meet in the middle. And it's like
yeah,
we need to find
yeah,
the middle ground. Like,
yeah,
like there are conservative, Christian children, or Muslim kids or Jewish kids where their parents are trying to raise them in certain
yeah,
ways, whether we
yeah.
agree with that or not,
Right,
whether that's
right.
our
That's
cup
their
of tea
right.
or not.
That's their right.
They shouldn't.
That's yeah.
They should be able to object to what like their kids
But
being taught. Like in primary school, so before they even
yeah,
hit puberty, about
yeah.
all this sexual stuff. Because I was watching a Lawrence Fox thing
Uh-huh.
weeks ago, and he was talking about, with a dancer that got cancelled, about part of, and we kind of had this as well, like, once you have the basics, like, you can be as creative or as exploratory as you want,
Yeah.
but you kind of have to have a basis before, like,
That's
you have to
true.
have a home, you have to know
That's true.
the basics before you can get to the advanced stuff. Like, if
No, that's true.
teaching kids the
Yeah.
advanced stuff before they have the basics,
Yeah, that's truth
that's
to
going to
that.
fuck a lot of
Yeah.
people up,
That's
like,
true to that. And yeah, parents do have the right to impart their values to their children. I mean,
yep,
even whether I agree with the values or not, I mean, they do,
yep,
I mean, I guess that could get into a bigger discussion about what those values are, but yeah, definitely. I mean, when it comes to propriety and modesty and whatever, I mean, that's just a fact. We do give people that freedom. Yeah, I think in Australia and in the United States, so the public schools have to respect that, or we have to give people choices about education, I think, and also transparency, and let the parents let the parents give permission for these things,
yeah. And the parents know
otherwise if
exactly what's happening in those lessons,
yes,
because,
yes,
like, yeah, there's this weird thing where it's like, oh, no, no, we know this is the right way and we know better than you about
right,
this stuff. And it's like, these are
right,
theories and ideas. We know, like, when it gets down to brass tacks, we actually don't know as much about, everything as we think we do. Like, the world is
yeah,
not as solid as we think,
right.
we're not as smart as we think. So maybe have a little bit of humility that maybe, you might have the answer, you might not. However
Well,
convinced of it you are, like,
and also I think if we don't do that in the schools, you start it's we're the kids are being indoctrinated, or that's the charge. Which, there's truth to that. If the parents don't know what's going on, and they're seeing something, whatever, the gender unicorn or whatever, which is kind of benign. It's a little silly, but I think it's benign. But not everybody's going to go along with it. So, maybe if the parents don't want their kids to learn about the gender unicorn, I think that's well within their rights. The kids can learn about it later. Or they can,
well, and
they
that's
probably will. They probably will because it's in the culture,
yeah, like
But
my parents didn't talk to me about gay stuff at all. And then I had a step uncle who came out when I was 7, and my dad freaked out about it. And I remember like kind of really being judgy at my 7-year-old self could not comprehend why my father was being homophobic. And I mean, he got over it pretty quickly, and like blah 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 blah. But like no one had ever said anything about gay to me whatsoever. It was
right,
1982. I was 7 years old. Um,
yeah,
and I had strong opinions about why are you freaking out about this? This is not a big deal. Like
right.
I kind of think even if they didn't teach trans anything at school, like these kids will, you know,
A lot of kids will be really open, like the way you were. You were kind of open. You didn't get why it was so bad. I think I mean, my God, I grew up in the '60s, which is really even before you, and so, I mean, people didn't talk about homosexuality, right? I mean, it was like I kind of became aware of it at some point, but it was like something. I knew it was bad. I didn't know why, and and again, as a kid, I was like, well, what? Why? But it seems like adults react in this really intense way, like it's a really bad thing, right? And I didn't get why. I mean, I think that's actually more damaging, you know? So, I mean, there is this question, but you know what? Not everybody has the same values. I mean, I would support teaching kids like gay people are good, they're fine, there's nothing wrong with being gay. But you know what? Again, I guess I'll take the more libertarian stance, and like, we cannot, force people. That is just not good. You can't force people's kids. You can't tell these parents, you have to we're going to do this no matter what you want. I mean, that's not right. Then your opinion, that just opens a can of worms. And I think that's one of the things that's happening right now,
yeah,
and I understand that. Of course, people object to that. If they feel like they're going into it and they're saying, okay, they're, they're giving their consent, it might be different. I mean, it really will backfire. It's starting to backfire. That's part of the backlash, I think. You can't control, the fact is there are social conservatives out there,
yeah.
Matt Walsh exists.
And I was watching Glenn Beck last night, which is funny actually, but he was kind of saying, like we kind of need like there need to be leftists, there need to be right wing people, there need to be extremists on both ends, there needs to be
That's
like
interesting.
we need each other because if there were only leftists in the world, there would be no bean counters, and if there were only bean counters in the world, there would be no arts. Like we need everything. Like
Right,
this is
right.
kind of
Well,
important. There's room
yeah,
for
it's
everybody.
it's
It's a big world.
yeah, yeah. Well, that kind of diversity of thought. That's where creativity comes. There's a war going on right now. I mean, that's why the backlash. It's a kind of war. I mean, that's why at some points I've thought, what's more important, winning the war, right, or coming out for truth? And I'm trying to pursue truth. And and again, I realize at some point, like especially when it comes to the issue of trans kids, and how do you approach that? It's tricky. And I'm not a therapist, and I don't necessarily have all the answers to this. I'm suspicious of the blockers, but the other day I saw something on Facebook in this very pro in a group basically with a lot of medical people and counselors, where they were claiming that the blockers were more benign, right? And I'm like, I want to go back to that group, and I want to talk to those people and say, give me the source. I want to see the source. I've only seen all this negative stuff. I know the negative end. Like, I want to see the source. I've doubts about using them because it's pretty extreme. I think it seems like there's possibilities for bone loss and so on. But I want to see the sources, and again, and I'm not, again, I don't necessarily have the last word,
Uh-huh.
but, I'm just one person here trying to,
Yeah, yeah.
but, I guess because I write and I've been in films and I've spoken about trans stuff, there's a feeling of responsibility sometimes. And I've had to tell myself, you know what, Max, you don't have the last word. But
No.
I think we all have to. This goes back to the thing that you had said earlier about how we can't talk to each other. And I'm hearing this from a lot of people. I'm hearing people on the left and people in many places. Many trans people are saying this to me, and people far to my left are saying I can't say certain things, because these are things we need to discuss. If we're going to figure out the blocker thing, we need to sit down and have a discussion about this. I think like anything, there's pros and cons,
Yeah,
ultimately. But anyway,
yeah.
so